So you think you're going to get a bumper crop because the soil isn't moist?
We have moist soil now, so, you know, like I said, bearing some kind of drought, I think you probably see more downward pressure on crop prices, which kind of leads us to be probably a little bit more cautious heading into 2025, just because farmer incomes are still going to be under tremendous pressure, really what we think will be for at least a third straight year. And that's really just going to, you know, temper buying expectations.
All right, Chris, we really appreciate it. Chris Cialino joining us, Bloomberg Intelligence, senior U.S. machinery analyst. But it can't be too moist, like you can't have floods and you can't have drought, you know.
All right, John, your assignment today, go home and feel your soil and see how moist it is.
I don't think we need to do that.
You also run the danger of the seeds rotting before they sprout if it's too moist. So
exactly.
Too much moisture can be a problem
That
as
farming
well.
business is tough.
Oh my gosh.
At least with my begonias.
I mean, that's why you have crop insurance. Like, you really need it because you're just, I mean, even though you might complain about all the handouts, etc., but like, it's huge.
It's big. All right. If you remember, about a week ago, I attended the Boston Consulting Group Edge Expo in Boston, Massachusetts. Had the opportunity to chat with a lot of smart people, top execs at BCG. One was with Global Chair Rich Lesser. He engages with CEOs, boards of directors, and senior leaders around the world on critical topics, including climate change and artificial intelligence. I began the conversation by asking Rich what he spends the most time talking to clients about. Let's take a listen.
So it's been a remarkable decade, and it's not even half over yet.
Right.
And I think the two characteristics that we are living with right now to a very high degree is uncertainty and change. And they're not the same thing. Uncertainty causes you to want to hunker down, you know, just get through it. Change forces you to be bold, to invest, to take some risk. And right now, more than I can remember, CEOs get pulled in both directions. How to navigate, particularly if you're like a European CEO, you've got two wars not so far away, and you've got all the pressures of energy costs and all the uncertainty of all these elections this year and so forth. You've got an enormous amount of uncertainty, but of course, just like CEOs everywhere in the world, you've got rapid technology evolution, you've got to prepare for climate change, all sorts of things. So I think that's the tension point, is how to balance those.
Let's talk about climate change a little bit here. It feels like maybe we're at a little bit of an ebb here in the U.S. I'm not sure I don't think that's necessarily the case in Europe, but I'm feeling a little bit here. How do you engage with your clients about climate change? What's the challenge these days? Is it convincing them that it's there, that it's an issue? Convincing them that they need to maybe invest in getting to a cleaner economy? What are some of the challenges you guys are seeing?
I think it's really important to separate what people want to talk about publicly and what they do. Many CEOs, particularly of leading U.S. companies, have made pretty substantial commitments over the last 2 to 3 years. But in making those commitments, they were very visible and public about it a couple years ago. And I think right now the sense is you don't walk away from your commitments. And I know very few CEOs, like very few, that I think are really trying to walk away from their commitments. I think most of them have tried to put them in their processes, ensure they get delivered. But at the same time, it's become such a politicized topic. We're all going to live on this planet. We're all going to bear the consequences of climate change. But unfortunately, in the public discourse and in a very, you know, it's an election year, it's just become very political. And I don't think CEOs want to be so public on these very difficult, divisive topics. So they're much quieter. They're not walking away from their previous commitments, but they're also being careful about new commitments, partly because of the public attention and partly because they don't know where the policy environment is going next year.
And you know, I guess an example of that is ESG. It was the term for so many years, and now it's really fallen out of favor here in the U.S. in particular. But again, I guess the underlying commitment for many of those folks is still there.
Well, the problem is ESG, even people who were committed weren't always sure exactly what ESG was and what it meant. It was initials that were bundling 3 very different kinds of attributes together. And then it got politicized as a term without even people knowing why they shouldn't like it sometimes. So I think very few CEOs are using ESG language right now. You talk about your climate and sustainability commitments. You often talk about diversity and inclusion. Good governance, I don't think anybody questions, makes for stronger companies. But when you put it together in ways people don't understand, you're just almost looking for trouble. And I think CEOs, the last thing they want to do is look for trouble.
You know, when you look at the economic data, which is what we at Bloomberg do all the time, and we talk about it all the time with a lot of smart people, what are you hearing about the economy from some of your CEO clients out there? It seems, again, there's some shifting winds out there for a lot of people, particularly those who own assets. life's good. Those that don't, maybe not so much. That inflation thing, for example, is a real problem. What are you hearing?
So, look, we've been on the more optimistic side of the economic outlook for a while. Back when everybody was saying recession or super high inflation, we were of a position led by our chief economist, Philip Carlson, that we could get to a soft landing and that was not as low a probability scenario. Now we're living in a soft landing world, but one, soft landings for companies have hard edges.
Yep.
You still have wages growing faster than your power to raise prices. You still have low growth, not super high growth. It's hard to drive your own growth agenda without doing a lot of innovation. And so it's not so easy. And second, we're finding actually the glide path for the last 1,000 feet to the ground. We got a glide path from 30,000 feet of risk down to a couple thousand. But, getting from a world of high twos, low threes down to well below 2.5, approaching 2, is proving to be tricky. And the consequence of that, as you say, is that interest rates are high, and there's much less sign of them coming down. And in that environment, it makes a couple things hard. First, for many, many consumers who don't have much in the way of savings, buying a car, buying a house, renovating a house, all of those things go up much more than the underlying prices do because of the interest costs. And second, for many of the capital investments we need to make, including climate and sustainability, things that look like they made a lot of economic sense a couple of years ago are much harder to justify now. So if you have a lot of assets, you're right, it's not bad right now. You can get good value on. But if you've got to make investments, take on debt, do things, that is trickier.
We spent a lot of time at your conference here talking about AI and the investment needed in AI and the commitment needed and the ethics around AI. How prevalent is that in your discussions with your clients at the CEO level, the board level?
I am blown away by how much energy CEOs are putting into thinking this topic through. But for me, the big difference between the last 6 months and say the first 9 or 10 months since the big announcements, the last 6 months, people are less focused on thinking it through in the sense of understanding the technology and more about how they can drive business impact at scale. And for us, it's been honestly one of the most exciting periods I can remember on something where we went from less than 20 clients a year ago today working on this to 350. Wow. I mean, we've never had something like that. And I think that for us, there's a lot of opportunity that we're seeing now get materialized versus theorized. And CEOs are realizing it. They have to balance it. They have other priorities they have to do. They have to do it in a responsible way, to your point. Be careful there aren't hidden biases. Be careful they're not misusing the technology. But the underlying sense of opportunity right now has gone up quite a lot. And I think the more they see other companies delivering, actually putting it into results that they post, deeper customer relationships, the faster we'll see that come along.
All right, that was Global Chair Rich Lesser of BCG, Boston Consulting Group. I was up there attending their Boston Consulting Group Edge Expo in Boston, talking to a lot of their leaders, senior partners there at BCG about some of the issues they are working with their clients are on. A lot of it was about competition, global competition, technology, particularly AI as well. So a lot going on there, and they're getting more and more engaged with their clients. All right, right now, let's get a little bit of a reset. And we can do that with Mr. John Tucker.
All right, Paul and Alex, stocks are higher, but they paired some of the earlier gains. Was an historic day for the Dow Jones Industrial Average as it pushed through 40,000 for the first time. The Dow has more than doubled from the pandemic low back in March of 2020. Earnings report from Walmart helped lift the Dow. Walmart shares right now up close to 6% after their earnings report. The Dow has since retreated right now 82 points higher, 39,990. Meantime, JP Morgan CEO Jamie Dimon telling Bloomberg a lot of inflationary forces are in front of us and the Fed is on the right course.
The Fed will have to follow the data, and I don't know what the data is going to say, but I think they are doing the right thing to be patient right now. See what's going to happen. They may not know for a couple of months.
And the data today point to stability, really gradual cooling of an otherwise resilient U.S. economy. S&P 500, after yesterday's record close, that's at a record, up right now, close to 10 points, up 0.2%, 5317 on the index. And the NASDAQ 100, 40 points higher, that's a record, up 0.2%. As far as treasuries, yields are higher. The 2-year yield, 5 basis points higher. That's at 477. The 10-year is up 2 basis points, That is at 436. Again, the Dow right now at 39,998, 90 points higher. We check the markets for you all day long. Right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Paul and Alex.
Thank you so much, John Tucker. I'm Alex Steele, alongside Paul Sweeney and John Tucker. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. We bring you all the top news in economics and finance all around the world with our great Bloomberg Intelligence analysts. They cover 2,000 companies and 130 industries worldwide. What's not at a record is small caps. So they pushed higher yesterday. They were near a two-year high, but not yet at a record. And today, they're a little bit softer. So you have to wonder if that whole rally broadening out thing is still on the docket. Let's get more here with David Kudla, founder, CEO, and chief investment strategist at Mainstay Capital Management. He's on Zoom from Naples, Florida. So that's not too shabby. Nice. Yeah, nice job on that one. David, 40,000 for the Dow. It's a nice round number. We like nice round numbers. You buying it?
Yeah, I'm buying it. Good morning, Alex and Paul. The market just has a lot of things going for right now. There are things that were tailwinds or were headwinds have become tailwinds. We've got strong earnings. We've got a Fed that I think Jay Powell's looking for a reason to cut. And I think that Janet Yellen wants Jay Powell to cut so that she can afford the service the debt, our national debt, better. And we look forward at market fundamentals. We look forward at what's happening with generative AI and what that means in terms of what we're calling the next industrial revolution. This deal with Apple and OpenAI and the power that people are going to have in the holding their hand in a handheld device. There's some things that can trip us up, but the market's really in good shape right now. And market sentiment has changed so much. Investor sentiment from just 2 weeks ago, it's incredible.
So, David, talks about earnings. What are your takeaways here for this earnings, which have generally been pretty solid across the board? What are your takeaways?
Well, we went through the earnings trough, and we've emerged from that. And now, when we look at first quarter earnings, we're coming in well ahead of expectations. Profit margins are the best in 2 years, and that's really the key. There's so many questions about the Fed. Look, we've been, just since the beginning of the year, we've been all over the map on how many Fed rate cuts we'll get this year, anywhere between 0 and 7 or even a rate hike. But when we look over at fundamentals, just corporate earnings are coming in better than expected. And, that's obviously positive for stocks and one of the most important long-term factors. And we're looking for double-digit growth in earnings down the road this year. So it's a scenario that if we continue with some multiple expansion, earnings continue to do well. The Fed, if anything, that is looking to show that they're on a cutting cycle. They want to cut at least once to show they're on a cutting cycle. It's just they're having trouble. They got help with non-farm payrolls. They got help with retail sales. CPI, we're going to see an opening here, and that'll just be more, another catalyst, more horsepower for the bulls out there to take the market higher.
So does that mean
that is with it coming? I'm sorry, I was going to say with it coming on more in the spirit of a normalization of Fed policy, not because the recessionary forces out there are becoming overwhelming and we're seeing a slowing economy. We're not seeing that. GDP has remained quite strong.
So when you talk about the AI and the new industrial revolution, what's so interesting is that utilities over the last few weeks in May have been the second best performing sector in the S&P along with tech. Can utilities be a growth sector in this environment that you're outlining?
I think that's yet to be seen. The belief there, or the thesis there, is that there is going to be so much energy demand for all these super chips and all the energy required for this revolution, this implementation of generative AI. I think it's also investors looking for more areas they can diversify into, but I think it's yet to be seen how much that really translates, that demand for energy translates into actually pushing utility stocks higher. It's not a typical reaction function we've seen in the past, but we can see how it could be one going forward.
David, aside from the AI play, a lot of investors feel like maybe they've kind of, at least in the short term, missed some of the big seven, Magnificent Seven plays. What are some other areas that you think there's maybe value out there in the marketplace?
Yeah, well, we've been saying this for a while, even when we've had these sell-offs in the Magnificent Seven or the Fabulous Four, or really just mega cap tech.
Yep.
To stay with them, because they're really becoming all-weather stocks with these fortress balance sheets and wide moats around them, and their balance sheets. They companies like Apple. Microsoft doesn't matter what rates are doing. So it's such a good place to have a good portion of your portfolio in large caps, specifically large cap tech with that focus on AI. But yeah, we look to other areas that have done well, and it'll depend how the economy moves forward. There's still this risk we move into a stagflationary environment, which might lead us towards commodities. There's also do we have a hard landing, soft landing, or no landing? We've been calling for the no landing scenario. I think we're somewhere between soft landing and no landing, but clearly in a Goldilocks economy, so a lot of different sectors are looking good.
Yeah.
And overseas, there are even some areas there that are attractive.
Well, where overseas? I know that the Nikkei in Japan has been a huge hotspot, particularly with the weaker yen.
Yeah, that's really our main play is Japan. A lot of it is in fact the currency play, and you need, if you invest in Japan, do it with a currency hedged vehicle. But the rally in the Nikkei 225. I mean, we reached a high here this year that we haven't seen since 1989, when I was walking around the campus at Stanford learning how to invest and learning about business, right? I mean, it's been that long. And so there's, with corporate reforms, things that still are ringing true from Abenomics. Japan is in a position struggling with monetary policy, obviously, but with that weak currency, they're an exporting country. Their products are so competitive abroad. And so that's why they've done so well. You've just got to hedge that bet. Europe is starting to look a little bit better too, from where they were a year ago. The concern here is where rates go. When you come to emerging markets and some of the other more interest rate sensitive economies, like we've seen China, a resurgence in China recently, but we would continue to avoid there for now because of the structural problems they have. But it's really right now for us, it's America first. The U.S. economy is still rolling, in a pretty strong manner. The consumer is still strong. We're wondering, how many times have we heard the consumer's running out of money? The consumer's they're gonna run out of pandemic money. They're running out of money. They're borrowing, but the consumer's still strong, and that's the mainstay of our economy. So no pun intended. That's the mainstay of our economy. And we're America first, with looking for some opportunities to tactically allocate to some other areas to manage portfolio risk.
All right, David. Always appreciate checking in with you. David Kudla, he's a founder, and he's the Chief Executive Officer, and he's the Chief Investment Strategist over at Mainstay Capital Management, based in Michigan, but smartly right now in Naples, Florida, coming at us from Zoom. All right, the Naples days are kind of done. It's going to get unbearably hot. Where you want to be from now on? Jersey Shore, baby.
Yeah, you kind of do. Also, today, it's not that nice in New York. It's rainy and gross, but man, is it humid.
Yes.
So henceforth, the Jersey Shore, the Paul Sweeney house. We're all waiting for our invite. I mean, John Tucker and I were like,
I don't really need one. I'm down there too. I guess I have an invite.
Okay, I'm waiting for an invite to y'all's house. I guess that's not going to happen.
So, all right, we'll see. We got that. We're back above 40,000 here, up 124 points. So I like the nice round numbers. I like that our equities team in Bloomberg News was cheering.
That is nice.
When that's cute. So again, 40,030 on your Dow Jones Industrials with our news in New York. Here's Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Paul. Alex, John. President Biden is asserting executive privilege to prevent House Republicans from obtaining audio of his interviews with special counsel Robert Hur. while Herr wrote in his report that there was not enough evidence to sustain charges against Biden for his handling of classified documents. He also said Biden showed himself to be a well-meaning but forgetful elderly man. Russian President Vladimir Putin thanked Chinese leader Xi Jinping for his effort to resolve the Ukraine conflict at a Beijing summit today. The two leaders reaffirmed the no-limits partnership that has grown deeper as both countries face deepening tensions with the West. Bloomberg News Asia correspondent Rebecca Chung-Wilkins is in Hong Kong.
Well, they're certainly one another's sort of most important allies when it comes to this bigger geopolitical agenda of building the so-called multipolar world, pushing back on what they see as sort of the US hegemony. But of course, since Vladimir Putin's invasion of Ukraine, there has been a much deeper imbalance in that relationship. Russia has needed China economically far more than it has ever done in the past.
Bloomberg's Rebecca Chung-Wilkins. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky says the delay in U.S. aid to Ukraine has had a direct impact on the war along the northeastern border. Russia is now pushing towards Ukraine's second-largest city, Kharkiv. Zelensky told ABC the money for military aid goes mostly back into the U.S. economy.
All this money, they goes to the factories in the United States, mostly. Some of them in Europe, but mostly in the United States, I think about 80%. And then these factories gives jobs to Americans.
More cross-examination for Donald Trump's former fixer at the criminal hush money trial in New York. This morning, defense lawyers are hammering at star witness Michael Cohen's credibility. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Dow Jones Industrial Average topping the 40,000 level for the first time, helping boost the index. Walmart rising over 5%. They reported stronger profit for the latest quarter than analysts expected. Also said revenue for the year could top the forecast range that it gave earlier. Shares of Walmart right now 6% higher. Data also in the driver's seat. Constance Hunter, just heard from her extensively at Macro Policy Perspectives, says yesterday's softer CPI did change the entire conversation.
Yesterday, it confirmed, finally, OER is starting to soften. Rent prices are starting to soften. It was a print that showed we are moving in the right direction, and we are going to get rate cuts this year.
Today's data kind of in line with the overall theme of the week. Nothing too dramatic. Also showing signs of a steady to cooling economy. 2-year yield 5 basis points higher right now. That's at 4.77. The 10 up 2 basis points. That's at 4.36. I'll just go through some of the stocks that are on the move. Deere, after their earnings report, down about 2.9%. Chubb, after Berkshire Hathaway disclosing a big stake there, they're up 3.76%. And Cisco Systems, after the earnings, they are down 2.1%. Overall, S&P 500, 11 points higher, up 0.2%. That's a record, 53.19. NASDAQ 100, that's a record, up 47 points right now, up 0.25%. And the Dow Jones Industrial Average up 115 points, 40,023 right now. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Alex and Paul.
All right, thank you so much, John Tucker. This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. I'm Alex Steele alongside Paul Sweeney. We cover all the top news in economics and finance through the lens with our Bloomberg Intelligence analysts. They cover 2,000 companies, 130 industries all around the world, and they are truly the creme de la creme. And one of them is Poonam Goyal, Senior U.S. E-commerce and Retail Analyst over at Bloomberg Intelligence. And this time we're going to break down Under Armour. So the stock is up 1%, despite the fact that its profit forecast missed expectations and they announced a restructuring. Poonam, what in the world is going on with Under Armour?
So the results were bad, and so was the guidance, which is why when the stock first printed, or the shares first printed, they were down about 15%. But I think what we heard on the call from the CEO is that they are going to try to turn this business around. And the turn that we see is probably reflecting investor confidence in their ability to do so. Now, this isn't the first time Under Armour has tried to bring on a turnaround. So I think execution is going to be key here, and it will take time. This is not something that we'll see start to unfold till probably next year.
Poonam, I guess in my mind, Under Armour has a very good brand, but help us position Under Armour versus the competition, whether it's Puma, Adidas, Nike, those types.
So Under Armour is definitely a brand that is well recognized, and it is a global brand. But that said, it's much smaller than Nike and Adidas. It is, in line with Puma. But when you think about Under Armour, and especially in the North America market, the problem that they've had is pricing. When you buy Under Armour, you're looking for a deal. You're looking for low prices. That's what the brand stands for today. And I think that's what they're trying to turn around. It's not perceived as a premium brand here in the U.S., and they want to bring that back. And that's not going to happen overnight.
It's a tough economy to try and bring back pricing premium. What is the restructuring what's going to happen with the restructuring, and how is that going to help them do that?
Well, I think more than the restructuring, it's going to be the moves that they make on inventory. So they're planning to cut their inventory aggressively in the next quarter, which should help them optimize the flow of inventory. The other thing, which actually caught me by surprise, was it takes Under Armour 18 months to bring product to market.
What?
That's a long time. I mean, retail has far moved past that window, and the reduction to 3 to 6 months when they're able to do that, I think will help them. But I don't think that's happening overnight either. So as they fix their speed to market, as they fix their inventory, as they focus the brand on better product, better marketing, these are all things that you hear that you want to hear from every company do. But the question is, can they do it? And can they do it consistently over the next 12 to 18 months?
So I'm looking at the PGEO function, which gives you financial analysis, and you can look at revenue and profitability by segment. I thought footwear was a bigger part of their business, but it's only 25% of revenue. It seems like that's the competitive part of the marketplace when you think about it. Like I was just telling Alex a couple of days ago, like I don't have much brand loyalty, but sneakers is one of them, and Nike is one of them for me. And I wonder what their strategy should be in footwear.
Sure. So footwear is a smaller piece of their business, absolutely right. But where they shine in footwear is on the Curry franchise. I think that is where Under Armour really has more brand heat. On the rest of it, it's really probably price positioned for, I'd say, a lower to mid-income customer, not the high end. It's probably Curry where they get the higher end customer spend. But footwear didn't do well. I mean, if you look at the trends from the fourth quarter, footwear sales were actually down 11%, and apparel was only down 1%. So there's kind of something happening there that I think falls back on product, really. I think they really need to fix their product and stop being so promotional, because that does, at the end of the day, impact your brand image.
Poonam, why is the best strategy to then go compete with the higher end brands versus trying to lower their price point and getting good product out for cheaper and build up volume?
Well, it's still, Under Armour is still one of the premium brands. Right? When you think about sportswear, who do you think of? You think of Nike, Adidas, Under Armour, Puma, On now, Hoka. Like, these are the brands that come to mind for anyone when they think of the athleisure space. But when you think about how much you should spend on them, there's a perception that Under Armour should be significantly cheaper than Nike. And the reason for that is because they've been slashing prices to move inventory across channels, especially wholesale. And, you know, there was a time many years ago where they were all over off price. I mean, it was just too much inventory, priced very aggressively, and people didn't want to pay more. So I think it's just coming back to trying to sell more at full price.
All right, Poonam, based upon all the retail companies you cover, just give us a snapshot of kind of what you're hearing from your companies about the consumer today. It seems like a lot of crosswinds out there, K-economy and all that type of discussion.
Yeah, look, the consumer is still pretty challenged. They are focused on price. They are picking and choosing where and how they want to spend. Companies that are able to offer price, convenience, whether it's the Amazons of the world or any other company like a Nike, those are the ones that are doing well, and the ones that have global exposure. Because as you heard from Under Armour today, the North America market was where it was really challenging, but in Europe, they actually did better. So to have that diversification and to have the broad reach and a value component to your story, unless you have really a premium product, is where the consumer is gravitating towards.
All right, Poonam, I want to ask you the same question I asked Jen Bartashis. I'm going to go to a Walmart this Saturday. Mm-hmm. Give me some tips for an effective kind of tour that you do all the time as part of your job.
Yeah, so I mean, when I go there, it depends on what I'm looking at. If I'm looking at their apparel section, the first thing I'm looking at is inventory and how busy those racks are, right? How much is actually selling versus do we see empty racks? Do we see full racks? What are they selling at? Have they promoted a lot of the merchandise? Is there a bigger sale rack? And if I was to go to the consumables aisle or the electronics aisle, it would be, where are things positioned? What's at the end cap? How are we looking at, once again, the inventory on shelf? Is there enough inventory on shelf or is there not?
What's end cap? What does that mean?
That's, you know, when you walk into a store and the aisle, if you think about the aisle, it's a vertical aisle. What sits at the front of it, basically, that's your end cap. So those products are typically sponsored products or paid for shelf space, because that is where the customer will definitely cross. So those are kind of like the products that you know you want to sell or that you're trying to market to the customer walking in the door.
I did not know that.
I did not know that either, but I'm going to do an end cap walk in Walmart.
I'm going to expect we need to do a whole segment on this on Monday.
The whole report's coming back. All right, Poonam Goyal, thanks so much for that. As always, Poonam Goyal, Senior U.S. E-commerce and Retail Analyst from Bloomberg Intelligence, joining us from Princeton via Zoom. Do you have any brand loyalty to, like, do you own sneaks?
No, but I have a foot thing. So, but it was Asics was when I used to run, but now I can't wear flats, so I can't.
What's this now?
And my arch is too high, and my muscles are too.
She doesn't have to share her medical problems with us on air.
So I have to wear orthopedics or heels. Those are my two options.
Really, orthopedics or heels?
Yes, this is it.
That's a tough combination there.
So I have brand loyalty to sales. That's what I have brand loyalty.
Dow Jones Industrials, literally 40,002, up 94 points. We're all over this 40,000 trade.
You know
Shout
who's
out
not? Jamie Dimon.
Oh.
company news headlines on Bloomberg Radio.
And I'm John Tucker in the newsroom with a look at some of the company stories that we are following for you. Let's do the meme stock mania. Looks like it's starting to fizzle. GameStop fell 19% yesterday. AMC, those shares sank 20% yesterday. The movie theater chain actually took advantage of the recent stock rally to reduce its debt. So the slide has erased roughly $3 billion in market value between the two. This is just yesterday. The stocks had more than doubled over the first couple of days of the week. AMC and GameStop among the top securities bought by retail investors earlier this week, with 51 million and 16 million daily inflows. Ben Laidler, global market strategist at eToro, said the conditions that drove the surge in meme stock prices back in 2001, they're just no longer present at this time around. And today, the slide continues. GME, GameStop, 25% lower right now. AMC shares, they're down 12%. Citizens Financial, looking to raise capital with a previously out-of-favor type of preferred shares, is now staging a comeback among regional banks. The Rhode Island lender offering $250 million perpetual issue. It's going to be callable in 5 years' time and pay the same coupon until the stock is redeemed. This, according to our sources, the issue is going to be sold at $25 a piece, make it more attractive for retail. Price guidelines set between 7.5% and 7.625%. Now, as I do this last story, guess, as I'm reading it, which Bloomberg personality weighed in this morning in the newsroom. Cycling Frog says it's going to get in your head. It's among the canned drinks that aren't alcoholic, but they get buyers high because they're infused with THC. the main ingredient of pot. These drinks, along with many others like them, are now being sold by alcohol distributors in a bid to counter dwindling sales of booze. Yes, Matt Miller. That's your company news.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence with Alex Steele and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
This is Bloomberg Intelligence Radio. Happy Thursday. We're almost through the day. Dow's at 40,000. You got record high after record high after record high. And part of that is definitely going to be the Fed outlook. And it's also earnings. The problem then centers around inflation and then what the Fed does. So JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon has said today to Bloomberg that he's more worried about inflation than the markets appear to be. He said significant price pressures are still influencing the economy. Dimon spoke with Francine Lacroix at the JP Morgan Global Markets Conference over in Paris. And Francine asked him what market turbulence is looking like right now and if markets are just getting ahead of themselves.
I wouldn't call it turbulence. We've had good, healthy markets for quite a while. They're kind of predicting a soft landing, and you see that in both stock prices, which are kind of high, credit spreads, which are kind of low, markets which are kind of wide open. That's all good. It doesn't tell you what the future is going to be. I mean, I could point a lot of times in history where that was true, and the next year wasn't true, and so we'll see. I don't pay as much attention to monthly numbers as most people do.
I know. So what do you think the future is for inflation and interest rates?
I'm a little more worried about it. I mean, we've had very big fiscal deficits. And, I think the underlying inflation may not go away the way people expect it to. And I look at the future, like a lot of things we look at are kind of inflationary. The green economy, the remilitarization of the world, the infrastructure requirements, the restructuring of trade, fiscal deficits. So I think there are a lot of inflationary forces in front of us that, may keep it a little bit higher than people expect. So the surprise would be rates are higher, inflation a little bit higher, and maybe that'll slow growth. And obviously, geopolitics is a whole different issue. That could be determinative in what our economy does next year, and we're just not going to know.
But so does that mean you think it's 50-50 whether the Fed cuts or hikes next time around?
Yeah,
the next move?
I really don't pay that much attention to that. The Fed will have to follow the data, and I don't know what the data is going to say, but I think they are doing the right thing to be patient right now. See what's going to happen. They may not know for a couple of months.
But no big correction. I mean, if you don't pay that much attention to it, it means you're not worried about anything.
No, I'm worried. I just said stocks are very high, and I think the chance of inflation staying high or rates going up are higher than other people think. So I think the chance, my view is whatever the world is pricing in for a soft landing, I think it's probably half that. I think the chance of something going wrong is higher than people think.
In the U.S. or globally?
Well, I'd say in the U.S., but also that could affect globally, yeah.
And so what does that mean for markets?
They'd be down. And credit spreads would gap out.
So why is the market not pricing that in?
A lot of happy talk.
Where does that happy talk come from?
Low rates, central banks are going to reduce rates. Maybe the geopolitical things disseminate, don't cause problems, and so the future isn't predictable like that. So I'm a student of history. I've watched all the inflection points. If you go back, my dad was a stockbroker. I go back to the booming markets of 72 and the collapse of 74. The healthy markets of 80, the collapse of 82. The 87 market crash, the 1990 real estate crash, and almost all of them were not predicted the year before. So I look at these factors that drive these things. They're not always known. As a company, we prepare for all of it so we can serve all our clients regardless.
But what do you see as the main stress right now? Because if it's geopolitics, we talk about it. It's just not really priced in. Is it distress? Is it something actually going under that you worry about, or just multiple factors coming in at the same time?
I think geopolitics could create the main stress that we're worried about in terms of oil and gas prices, trade alliances. But I think the surprise would be higher rates because inflation didn't go down. That inflation has been stubborn, maybe bounces up next year. I think inflation next year may be in the cards. It may have nothing to do with what you're seeing today. So that to me is the surprise. If you had higher rates and God forbid stagflation, you'll see stress in real estate and leveraged companies and some private credit and things like that.
All right, that was JP Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon speaking with our own Francine Lacroix over in Paris. How about that at the JP Morgan Global Markets Conference? And I think from Jamie's perspective and what he sees from his customers, inflation's still a thing. So, he's not ready to put it to bed yet. So, interesting discussion there in Paris. Balance of power with Joe Matthew. Washington, D.C., they put it all right on the table there in Washington, D.C., and there's a lot to talk about. That starts right now.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Republicans try to paint Democrats into a corner on Israel. Welcome to the fastest show in politics. As the House tees up votes on a bill to guarantee weapons support for Israel, as we will discuss ahead with Bloomberg's Mike Dorning live in Washington. Just another day in court in New York for the former President Donald Trump, but also today, a whole new gaggle of lawmakers from Washington. We'll get into it with June Grasso from Bloomberg Law, with insights today from Republican strategist Lisa Camuso Miller. We'll tell you why President Biden just claimed executive privilege. That's later this hour with analysis from our signature panel. Bloomberg Politics contributors Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis are with us. And it's all after a look at Wall Street. Let's get to trading in New York right now with our friend Charlie Pellet. How's it look, Charlie?
I tell you, it's a historic day for those of you watching the Dow Jones Industrial Average. We crashed through 40,000. Right now, 39,990, bouncing right around that 40K number, big round number. The pros, though, will tell you it's just another number. The U.S. stock market powering ahead, the Dow hitting that historic 40,000 mark on bets that rate cuts will keep powering corporate America. S&P at 53.15, up another 7, up another 0.1%. NASDAQ somewhat subdued today, up less than 0.1%. 10-year, 4.37%. The 2-year, 4.78%. We've got spot gold advancing today, actually declining now, 0.2%. 23.81 the ounce on gold. West Texas Intermediate crude up by 1%. Well, you heard J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon live on Bloomberg earlier today. We heard an interview moments ago saying significant price pressures are still influencing the U.S. economy. He also spoke about the market outlook in that interview this morning with Bloomberg Radio from Paris.
We've had good, healthy markets for quite a while. They're kind of predicting a soft landing, and you see that in both stock prices, which are kind of high, credit spreads, which are kind of low, markets which are kind of wide open. That's all good. It doesn't tell you what the future is going to be. I mean, I could point a lot of times in history where that was true, and the next year it wasn't true, and so, we'll see. I don't pay as much attention to monthly numbers as most people do.
And we also asked about politics. Would he like a potential job as Treasury Secretary?
I don't think I'm suited for politics. I love my job, and so I'm not sure I want to do something like that.
J.P. Morgan Chase CEO Jamie Dimon speaking with Bloomberg Radio in Paris. J.P. Morgan shares, they're up 1% today, part of a broader stock market rally. Recapping, S&P now at 53.16, the Dow at 40,004, the Dow today up 0.2%. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington once again. Here's your host, Joe Matthew.
All right, Charlie Pellet, good to see you. Isn't that something? 40,000. Charlie, I bet you remember 10,000. Can you go back to 1,000?
Yeah, what are you getting at, Joe? Of course I remember 10,000.
I'm trying to figure out how old you are.
Exactly. I remember 5,000 too, but that's another conversation for another time. But I tell you,
did they make hats this time? Where are the rally hats?
I was thinking, where are the fireworks for 40,000 today? But again, you talk to the pros, right. It is just another big round number.
Sure it is, but I don't know. There's something psychological there, I feel like. Just while you were talking, and for our viewers on YouTube, just seeing that number, even though it's 40,001 or whatever it is, we're just not used to seeing that 40 handle. It's kind of amazing.
Right, exactly. And perhaps, too, the other significant threshold that we passed a matter of days ago, matter of months, was 5,000 on the S&P 500 index.
That's right.
So keeps on going. I'll meet you at 50K.
It's just crazy. Everybody was, I guess, so we're not in a recession? I guess we're proving that. Charlie, thank you.
There's the stock market, and then there's the economy. Yeah. Don't confuse the two.
Sure. No, of course, but people were, as usual, predicting doom and gloom as we walked into the new year, and it's always a pleasure to have Charlie Pellet bring us the real thing from Wall Street. We'll check back with Charlie on a very important day in the markets a little bit later on. It could be an important day in Washington as well, but not for policy making. We are now officially in messaging world. And if crazy season hasn't started yet, it's about to begin. They cleared the FAA reauthorization, and a lot of people are saying, that was just yesterday, a lot of people are saying that the store is closed. I mean, what else are they going to do in a campaign year other than pass messaging bills? And we're about to see that happen again. This is an important one, though. It has to do with Israel. We've talked about this yesterday when they were getting the rule to the floor to bring lawmakers to vote, to put their name on this bill, up or down, on whether we should compel the administration to guarantee weapons support for Israel. That's going to happen a little bit later on today. And there could be dozens, from what we're hearing, of Democrats who split from the White House to vote for this, and that's going to be the key here. How many Democrats can Mike Johnson pull over? Mike Dorning has been watching this from his perch, of course, as always, all things politics in Washington, editing the copy and reporting the news here, and he's with us at the table. Good to see you, Mike.
Great to see you.
We're not talking about a change in our policy toward Israel. This isn't even supposed to clear the Senate, right?
Yeah, no, this is very unlikely to clear the Senate, and for sure, President Biden would never sign this. So this is like not something that's actually going to happen in a real world. Yeah. So, but it does have an important political function. You can view it either cynically or you can view it sincerely. It shows a difference between a united Republican Party that is like, or basically almost united Republican Party that's like 100% behind Israel, versus a Democratic Party that is torn between sympathy for Palestinian civilians, who are, you know, some 30,000 killed in this, and people who are like, we need to do what we need to do to back Israel. So it's always great politically when you're uniting your own party and dividing the opposition. And while this is not an issue that's terribly likely to be a major determinant of the election, it is important to subgroups of American society, including ones that are important in congressional districts. And, you know, it might be a factor in the presidential election, too.
100%. So if you're a frontline Democrat right now, and you've got Joe Biden on the line saying you can't vote for this, but you don't want to be on the record voting against support for Israel. That's the dynamic, right?
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's a tough thing, but it's a tough thing for, you know, a lot of congressmen. I was interested, I don't know what he said Wednesday or today, but Jamie Raskin, who is Jewish and who represents a district that's very, you know, progressive but has a Jewish population. He was saying on Tuesday, you know, he was kind of torn about how to vote for this. And I think he's someone who's sincerely supportive of Israel, whose district is sincerely supportive of Israel, and whose district and he personally are also sincerely troubled about some of the stuff going on in Palestine.
Conversation with Brad Sherman, a hardcore supporter of Israel, and said he would probably, that was the word he chose, probably a no.
Yeah.
Realizing the stakes that we're talking about here. That's Washington for you. And Speaker Johnson has an opportunity now to turn this back against Joe Biden. And it happens just a day after they cleared the FAA reauthorization.
Yeah.
I just want to hit this quickly with you. 387.26, that's pretty impressive. It will do nothing to improve, I'm assuming, safety in the air or deal with any of this Boeing stuff from what I'm reading. It will add more flights to National Airport.
Yeah, if you're a member of Congress, that's important.
It's very important. I can't wait for the earlier mornings across the river. Is that the last thing they're going to get done?
You know, it's possible there might be some other things they get done. They might get a farm bill done. If I were betting, I would bet they would just extend it and not get it done. They'll probably have something that keeps the government from shutting down September 30th. If I had to bet, they'll kick the hard decisions until after the election.
Sure.
But it's probably the last real thing they're going to do this year. You know, if something comes up, an emergency, they might do something, for instance, on disaster response if there is something.
Got you. This is why experience matters. We turn to Mike Dorning at times like these. Great to see you.
Great
Bloomberg
to be
Politics
here, as
editor
always.
in Washington. I'm Joe Matthew. This is the fastest show in politics, Balance of Power. As we turn to the courthouse in Lower Manhattan with a number of stories that we're following today, and you know who we have to talk to there. June Grasso, the host of Bloomberg Law, is waiting for cross-examination to end now. Michael Cohen back on the stand today. Before we get there, June, can you imagine if your job right now paid you out for the year, by the 16th of May, you're done? Can we start running for Congress? What do you think?
Sounds good. It sounds very good to me. You know, What can I say? That's just that it sounds great.
No, I appreciate you humoring me there for a moment. Is anything going to change in terms of Michael Cohen's story by the time he gets done with cross-examination? Because it's starting to feel like everything we knew about Mike Cohen has already emerged here.
Yeah, so what the defense is trying to do, and it's in a disjointed kind of way, it's all over the place, but right now they're just attacking his credibility. They haven't even gotten to the point about the Stormy Daniels payments or anything like that. It's just his credibility. So it was Tuesday. It seems like it was forever, but it was just Tuesday when the cross began. We heard about his motive. You know, he made more than $2 million off of his hatred for Trump, says the defense. He had the books, the podcasts, the TikTok subscribers, and so that was, you know, his motive to lie and his bias. Now, today we're going into, again, his lying, continual lying, which, you know, we've heard before, and the prosecution brought some of it out, but now he's going into detail. He's really going it over and over and over. I don't know how much he really needs to do this, but he did bring out that when Michael Cohen took a plea and made his allocution before the judge, said he was guilty of the crimes, which you have to do in order to take a plea, he didn't believe that he was guilty of the tax crimes, which he has said over and over again. So he went, Todd Blanche, the defense attorney, went through that over and over. I think, you know, the problem is, Michael, and we've known this since before the charges were brought, where people said, are you going to base a case on Michael Cohen when he's so flawed? He has so many problems and his credibility is so low. So the prosecution has tried to back it up with documents, but, you know, it remains, will the jury believe him? And I think the defense is just going to keep hammering at that.
Are we going to be done this week, June? It's feeling like it.
Well, it feels like it, but I think what's happening is the defense, there's no trial tomorrow because Donald Trump is attending Barron Trump's high school graduation.
Yes.
So today, I think the defense is going to want to still be on cross when the day ends because they want the jury to have a long weekend to think about the cross-examination. So it might not end the prosecution until Monday, and then we'll find out if the defense is actually going to put on a case or not, and perhaps we'll find out whether Donald Trump is going to take the stand.
Oh, my God.
I
All
know,
right,
that's
so
a
let's
big-
just real quickly, both of those, haven't we heard that they are not planning to present much of a case? They might call one witness. And do you think in your wildest dreams you'd see Donald Trump on the stand?
I don't think I'll see Donald Trump on the stand in my I dream about better things, though, I have to say. Okay, Joe.
I don't mean to indicate
that, would
that
be
you
a
are
nightmare
dreaming about
dream.
Donald
That wouldn't
Trump,
be a dream, that would be a nightmare. So, but I don't think we will. But you never know what's going to happen with Trump. I mean, not because of what he says, but just because he may be sitting there thinking, I'm the only person that can turn this around. And the jury will believe me because he has that kind of opinion of himself through everything he does. And what they could, I'm not sure what the judge is going to allow in, but I know they want to probably bring in some experts about the election fraud here. We haven't heard anything about it from the prosecution. You know, what's the crime here that we're going after? So maybe the defense will want to bring that in. There's also speculation, would they want to bring in Robert Costello, the man who was sort of Michael Cohen's attorney, but Michael Cohen said no. I think they'll be thinking about it this weekend.
We're going to have to find something new to talk about at the end of this trial, June, because I'm not letting you go. Listen to her on Bloomberg Law, 6 p.m.
You want to move down the street to Menendez?
Washington time. Actually, yeah, that's a date because we have a lot to talk about there. The Menendez trial just beginning. You and I haven't even cracked that seal yet. June, thank you as always, as we keep our eyes on cross-examination of Michael Cohen. Now, story number 3. You know it is not going well for you when Ketanji Johnson refers to you in his Bloomberg story as embattled. That's not a good word in Washington, and it's exactly how the head of the FDIC is being described. Martin Gruenberg, in 2 days of brutal hearings into the toxic workplace culture at the FDIC, he showed up with an apology yesterday. Let's listen.
I accept the findings of the report, and as chairman, I take full responsibility. To anyone who has experienced sexual harassment, discrimination, or other misconduct at the FDIC, I again personally want to apologize and express how deeply sorry I am.
Referring to an independent report that emerged last week, we've spoken about this, including complaints from more than 500 people. There were questions not only about his tenure, but also his pension. And Katanga has been great covering this story. It's good to see you at the table, as always. Thanks for coming in. Is he done? What's going to happen?
The hearing is completed,
yeah.
But whether Bloomberg is done in
career?
his chair at the FDIC is still an open question. It seems at the end of a two-day hearing that most Democrats on the Hill want him to commit, both in public and in practice, to changing the culture of the agency, spelling out exactly how he'll even change his own approach in engaging
And they
with
see
his
him
staff
as
and the like.
capable of doing that.
They see him as capable, according to the hearings that sort of played out over the last couple of days. Many Republicans have called for him to resign. There seems to be a fine line on that issue politically, but really underneath, and this came up in the hearing today, many Democrats have called those cries for him to resign as being very hypocritical, especially given that the presidential nominee for the Republican Party is actually facing allegations of sexual harassment in court. And that came up today during the hearing. It was also clear that beyond what Bloomberg knew or didn't know, beyond whether he took action when he did find out soon enough and whether he can handle cleaning up the agency, there is this bigger conversation about the agenda that he has to vote on in addition to other banking regulators, including around capital and other reforms. And that was sort of sprinkled throughout the hearing today, just whether the agencies have come to some sort of resolve on how they move forward.
He seemed like, you might not believe, lawmakers may not believe, but he seemed like he was digging pretty deep with that apology to really try to show a more somber side here, a solemn apology. Did it work with anyone in the room?
Today seemed much more somber in terms of his delivery than yesterday, though he repeated many of this. He repeated his apology, but also went into more detail about how he actually plans to ensure that training for staff, as well as making sure that the heads of various field offices or other managers within the agency are held to a higher standard. That was critiqued even by Democrats. Is it enough? Can you do more? But it seemed as if, at least for now, that plan is keeping him safe.
Fascinating. We're out of time, as always. But how long will it be until we know his next move?
It's hard to say at this point. The hearings really were somewhat of a capstone of
So
him
this could
publicly
just be
being
quiet
able
and he goes on and continues to run the FDIC?
That could happen, though we'd have to wait and see.
Fascinating.
We'd have to wait and see.
You need to come in here more often. Katanga Johnson, find his story on the terminal and online. FDIC's Gruenberg facing more pressure to resign. Vows fixes. Let's see if anyone is listening. I'm Joe Matthew in Washington. We're going to turn back to the courthouse in New York, where a new gaggle of lawmakers emerged today. It's Freedom Caucus Day in the courthouse. This is Bloomberg.
Connection lost.
12:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long at Bloomberg. The Dow hovering right around 40,000. Bloomberg Radio brought to you by Boston Consulting Group. With their deep industry and functional expertise, BCG is bringing together advanced tech knowledge and ambitious entrepreneurship to help organizations unlock innovation at scale. The Dow, 39,987 after crossing 40,000 earlier in the session, up 79 right now, gaining 0.2%. S&P up 6, up 0.1%. We've got NASDAQ higher by 13, up by 0.1%. The oldest of Wall Street's three main stock indexes has been boosted by the prospect of a resilient U.S. economy, ebbing inflation, and robust corporate earnings. We've got the 10-year now yielding 4.37% with the 2-year 4.78%. NASDAQ, as I mentioned, pushing higher by 0.1%. Gold down 0.2%, 23.80 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude up now by about 0.8%. United Airlines is no longer under an operational freeze put in place by government regulators, a sign of progress after a series of safety issues led to a clampdown by the FAA. UAL lower now by 0.1%. And that is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie Pellet, thank you. Here we are in Washington on the fastest show in politics. I'm Joe Matthew. As we turn our attention to what's happening in Lower Manhattan once again, cross-examination today from Michael Cohen, but it's more the guests of the former president, the latest batch of surrogates who are making news, because frankly, as we talked about with June Grasso, we've heard a lot of this already from Michael Cohen. Remember, the Speaker of the House went to the court a couple of days ago. We've seen a number of folks who want to be vice president. Byron Donalds. We saw Governor Doug Burgum up there. Vivek Ramaswamy, the litigator. Today, it's the Freedom Caucus. They're not wearing matching suits, but they are there with matching messages. Matt Gaetz, Bob Good, Andy Gibbs, Lauren Boebert, all photographed in the courtroom there to, I guess, pitch in here on the effort. Lisa Camuso Miller is seeing this photograph, if you're with us on YouTube, for the first time right now. There they are in court as Donald Trump spoke earlier with reporters. There's your lineup. Of course, Republican strategist, former comms director at the RNC. Great to see you. Welcome back. Are you going to court soon?
No, thank you.
Okay. This has become a strange field trip that is apparently required.
But Joe,
if you want to be in the fold.
What do you do if you can't be on the campaign trail? You have to bring people to you, right?
So it's smart.
I mean, we're in uncharted territory, right? I mean, this is like something we've never had to see before. But ordinarily, when you're on the campaign trail, you're sitting down and you're bringing people behind you. You're standing at the podium, and they are standing as your supporters. So I suppose that this is the new normal, right? We are going to see people make the pilgrimage to Lower Manhattan to stand behind the former president.
As long as this thing's going.
That's for as long as this goes.
This is like the new Codell. You just go on up to New York and...
But it's not serious, right? So at some point, I think, though, the worm turns, right? And if you are a member of Congress and you are supposed to be demonstrating action and change for the elected, as an elected person for the constituencies, does this come back at you? Do people say, why are you not home in the district? Why are you not in the Capitol doing the work that you need to be doing? So to me, this is something I think they have to be very, very careful about because, right, election season is on and they want to see Congress get work done. The voters do anyway, right?
That's the idea. Well, let me ask you about that. A couple of things here. Before we get to actual business, I mentioned the Speaker of the House was there at the courthouse, and as someone who worked for a former Republican speaker, I can't imagine what went through your mind. That's not just a lawmaker. This is one of the highest-ranking elected officials in the United States of America. And Democrats are pretty upset that he went there and have made clear in some cases that they will not be there to support him if there's another motion to vacate. I know he needs Donald Trump, but it sure seems like he needs Democrats too. What did he just do to himself?
He does, but also too, Donald Trump has been a really big supporter for this speaker.
So that's clearly the more important ally.
He's done everything he can to keep the speaker at least sort of neutral in this fight with the Marjorie Taylor Greens of the world and all of these other people. The former president, has said he would prefer that not happen. And so it all depends on what the vote is, right? So Democrats can say whatever they're going to say, but if we come down to a vote that's about supporting our allies overseas or a vote that's about the economy, Democrats are going to have to work with this Congress or this Republican conference because the margins are so narrow otherwise.
Yeah, wow. He did manage to get the FAA reauthorization done. Not to mention all the rest. We saw Ukraine funding pass Israel. A lot of things that we were told were never going to see the light of day. So he's got a little bit of momentum here, but now we're told that that's it. It's the 16th of May. Are we done for the rest of this Congress?
Well, it sure feels like, I mean, I heard you earlier say that like this is a messaging game from this point on. That's precisely what happens in an election year. And so it does really feel that way. But if you're the speaker and you are looking back at your track record, he's got to be feeling pretty confident about the fact that he got a lot done. The expectations for this member was so low. True. And the fact that he got these things completed and got them done, FAA reauthorization, all of that is real accomplishment that ordinarily no one would have thought would have gotten done. And now Republicans get to ride on that success and use it as they're doing their messaging and moving forward into Election Day.
So bring us inside the Speaker's office at a moment like this. Mike Johnson, who we're seeing there at the court the other day on YouTube, back in town, you bring your people in the Speaker's office. What's the conversation when it's like, okay, well, it's strategy mapping. We're going to get this Israel thing tonight. What do we do next, Mr. Speaker? How do we deploy the troops? Knowing, as you just said, there's no more policy being made the rest of this year.
There's not, but you have to think about what are the messages, right? So they're looking really smartly at what are the topics that people care about, right? They care about the economy. They want to see action. They want to, actually, more than anything, they want to see change. They're not happy with the way this administration is handling things right now. So they're going to do everything they can to demonstrate that re-electing or electing a larger majority in the Republican conference actually would be better and more productive for the American people. And so that, to me, is the kind of messaging that they're going to be considering and working on from now until long after Memorial Day and into Election Day.
So you think about how to seize the moment then, and you've been through this time of year. We're going into the campaign cycle, right? Members, you want the members to go away.
Absolutely.
Don't be in Washington. Go run for re-election and raise money for all of us.
Right.
Are we going to see more runs to the border? Where are the photo ops and the events that carry us through the summer?
Well, smartly, they're probably all looking at their own specific districts. So yes, in those border states, they're going to talk about the border. In the states where they are really concerned about the support of the military, that they're going to be talking about that. They're going to look very specifically at what it is their own specific issues are that they can talk directly about. And you and I both know this. I mean, I didn't make up the phrase. I mean, it's been around for as long as you and I have been walking on the earth, but it's about the economy more than anything else. And so they're going to talk about what it is this administration has done to not make people feel better about their own home budgets and their own, their own personal economy. They're also going to be talking about how it is that electing Republicans means success for everyone outside of the Beltway.
This is, of course, all against the backdrop of a presidential race, which is something that you and I talk about a lot. And yesterday, the big news was debates. There's a debate about the debates now on this day after as to who was baited, who got, served. Does it help both of these candidates to stand in front of the American people and have an old-fashioned debate? Because a lot of people thought we were beyond that.
I think it hurts both of them.
It hurts both of them.
Neither one of them is very good in a debate. Donald Trump looks petulant, and Joe Biden is, at this point, the two of them are not great debaters, at least in my sort of personal public affairs point
Shut
of
up,
view.
man, isn't the kind of eloquence you're looking for?
Shut up, man is not good, and also who watches the debates, right? People like you and me, right? So I feel like it is also happening in an echo chamber.
Yeah.
We're all sort of like...
More than ever now, it's on cable news.
I know, and we're all paying attention to whether or not one over the other does better here in the debates. I think that there will be gaffes. I think that it provides each one of them an opportunity to attack the other. So more than anything else, yes, this is the way the process has always worked, but the American people are going to be tuning into YouTube and Netflix and all the other places they can because they're really not interested in what these two guys have to say, especially when they're debating one another.
Gotta be honest with you, it would not have surprised me if they had announced a live Netflix debate. Wouldn't that be the modern thing to do?
It would be the modern thing to do, but we're looking at two guys that are not really modern.
They don't watch Netflix, which is part of the problem. So you're prepping Joe Biden. I'm sorry, but you got the job. How do you operate by the rules if the other guy's not going to?
I'd like to see more of that Joe Biden that delivered the State of the Union.
So you tell him to go in there, play by his rules.
What does he have to lose, Joe? He has nothing
I don't know.
to lose.
You just reminded us of the stakes here.
He does the president himself does stumble. He's famous for all of the gaffes that he makes. But also, too, the people that love and are going to support Joe Biden are with Joe Biden. They'd prefer to see him stand up to Donald Trump and call him on the inaccuracies and the falsehoods that he advances when he's in the debate.
Right.
But can that happen in real time? I'm not so sure. And so that's what I'd be looking for. I'd be looking for opportunities. I'd be looking for one-liners. I'd be looking for the kinds of things for the president to use as ways to go back at Donald Trump without attacking him, but also calling him for some of the inaccuracies and the falsehoods that he does advance when he's on the debate stage.
You support the idea of cutting mics when people go over time?
Yes, I do, because I think people like you and me who are consuming these debates want to hear the issues and don't want to hear the back and forth.
We deserve mercy. But isn't that a precedent, though? I keep bringing this up, and people, nothing matters anymore. But to be cutting off the microphone of the president of the United States, that's a new precedent.
That would be really difficult.
Yeah.
And if they didn't do it on the debate stage with the candidates, Joe, it's super unlikely that they're going to do it
You think
so? I mean, one former president and one sitting president. It is very unlikely. And so it's going to be the kind of thing that's going to be unpalatable. People aren't going to want to watch it.
Wow. Yeah, you and I will. That's the best part. Smart to go early. That's a win for Biden. Get him up in June.
I think it's smart to go
Says
early.
a lot about his polls right now.
It really does. And I also think, too, that it's smart for him to take on Donald Trump, especially now when he's in the courtroom. So Joe Biden can be perceived as someone who is leading and standing behind the podium at the White House, and he is an elected that is at least sort of perceived to be not in the courtroom defending himself against bad decisions that the former president possibly may have made.
Yes. Wow.
So the optics are good that he can then go back to the podium at the White House, stand behind the bully pulpit and say smart things. Well, Donald Trump is in the courtroom talking about his debate performance while he's also talking about his private performances.
I heard something about that. We love Lisa Camusa Miller so much. She's coming back for the late edition of Balance of Power. We'll meet you on our panel in the 5 o'clock hour. It's such a big day around here. Nikki Miller is also with us in the Washington Bureau, so thank you for coming along. We'll have more with Lisa later on. Our panel's coming in next. Speaking of panels, Rick Davis, Jeannie Shanzana will be on the way after we check world and national news. Amy Morris has that from the Bloomberg 99.1 newsroom in Washington. Hi, Amy.
Hi, Joe. President Biden has exerted executive privilege over recordings of his interview with special counsel Robert Hur at the center of a Republican effort to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress. Garland advised Biden that the audio falls within the scope of executive privilege. The White House says the GOP is being political. President Biden has also met with the Joint Chiefs and Combatant Commanders to discuss various military operations around the globe. Now, at the top of the meeting, the president praised the military leaders for their hard work and their dedication, and he zeroed in on one issue in particular.
I'm proud that for the first time in nearly a decade, the rates of sexual assault and harassment are within active duty forces are down. That's because of your leadership.
Reports of assaults involving U.S. military members saw a drop in 2023 from the year before, from nearly 9,000 to around 8,500. Israel's defense minister says troop activity will intensify in Rafah and that, quote, additional tunnels will be destroyed soon. Meanwhile, the U.S. military has finished installing a floating pier for the Gaza Strip to deliver more humanitarian aid. No food has entered the two main border crossings in southern Gaza for more than a week. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
1240 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We've got the Dow Jones Industrial Average hovering right around 40,000. Right now, 39,985, up by about 0.2%. S&P advancing another 0.1%. Could see another record today out of NASDAQ, also up by 0.1%. 10-year, 4.36%. The 2-year, 4.78%. Spot gold now trading lower by 0.2%, 23.82 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.6%, 79.08 a barrel on WTI. Jobless claims are down, evidence that America's labor market, by and large, is running steady. That story from Bloomberg's Vinny Del Giudice.
Claims nationwide reverse course, dropping to 222,000 last week, a historically low level. In the prior week, claims rose mainly due to furloughs at New York City public schools. Bus drivers, as well as other New York City school workers, are allowed to file claims during spring break. Big picture, in the 20 years preceding the pandemic, jobless claims ran much higher on average, topping 300,000. Vinny Del Giudice, Bloomberg Radio.
Earnings news, Walmart shares up 6%. Walmart had another quarter of sales growth, and it now expects the full year to be slightly better than planned. Again, recapping stocks higher. S&P up 6, up 0.1%. The Dow right around 40,000, 39,983, up by 0.2%. By the way, that is a record. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your host, here he is, Joe Matthew.
Thank you, Charlie Pellet, and thanks for being with us on Bloomberg Radio, on the satellite, and on YouTube, where you can find us right now. Search Bloomberg Global News. You'll find our live feed. We're there every day, and we always save a seat for you in the studio. It's getting crowded in the courtroom in New York, although it does pain me to tell you that Andy Gibbs is not there. Didn't mean to say Andy Gibbs. It's the guy who runs the Freedom Caucus. Andy Biggs is among the Republican lawmakers who have gone to visit Donald Trump today. The Bee Gees are not among them. And we have breaking news right now. This is like right around the same time yesterday this happened, isn't it? Talking about presidential debates with our panel at this time yesterday. Remember the big deal, Biden-Trump? They agreed to 2, the first one in June. How about the vice presidential debates? That was one of the first questions we asked, and we're now getting an answer. Kamala Harris, this is just fresh off the tape here on the terminal. Bloomberg's Justin Sink reporting from the White House. Vice President Kamala Harris says she's ready to roll too, willing to debate Donald Trump's choice for running mate, and we don't know who that is yet, on either July 23 or August 13. Let's assemble the panel for their take. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano are with us, Bloomberg Politics contributors. Jeannie, we're doing this again, and the narrative in Washington is somehow Joe Biden stuffed Donald Trump on this one. What's Kamala Harris trying to do?
You know, I think she's trying to do the same. You know, color me skeptical that this actually happens because, you know, the fact is I'm looking at Donald Trump's truth, which, of course, he says things like, I hereby accept, which is just funny language coming from him. But, you know, I am skeptical that he actually goes through with this because, you know, Donald Trump, he can find it out on this. So hopefully it happens. I'm all for it. But I have to say, remain skeptical that we should all get so excited that we're going to get a bevy of these in the coming weeks.
Skepticism deserved and noted, Ms. Shanzano. I understand, based on our reporting here, Rick, the vice presidential debate, which CBS offered to host, would be held in accordance with the same guidelines that we heard about the presidential debates yesterday. You got to do at least one of these, right?
Yeah, I think you got to knock off a VP debate, and yet you got to have a VP to debate. So I think
that's the problem.
Pretty gratuitous of the campaign to the Biden campaign to say, oh, 1 week, less than a week after you've nominated a vice presidential nominee, we'd like them to be on the stage with my vice president, who's now served 4 years as either the nominee or the vice president. I mean, like, really? Okay, yeah, right. That's a great idea. But I think September, maybe this August date, right around their convention. Why do they want to step on their own convention? with a vice presidential debate just, a few days before it. Honestly, the VP thing is like just dumbfounding to me because from a scheduling point of view, none of these dates make any sense at all if you're the vice president. And honestly, it convinces me that they don't want a VP debate in the fall, right? I mean, like, we're going to squeeze this in right before our convention, no matter what, because last thing we want the American public seeing is Kamala Harris on the stage. Right before they vote. So, I mean, I think it's a recognition of what we all know, which is she's not very popular.
This is a great point here. If you're looking at your calendar at home, as Rick reminds us, the first opportunity, July 23, is the Tuesday after the Republican convention. August 13 is the Tuesday before the DNC. Maybe Jeannie's closer to the mark, and none of these happen anyway. I want to ask you both about what's going on in New York, which was my initial drive here to talk to you both, because to see the Freedom Caucus arrive at the courthouse, I don't know if this is the last batch to take the field trip here, but Jeannie, we saw the Speaker of the House. We've seen a lot of folks who want to be vice president, but if you're with us on YouTube, you see this latest now. Matt Gaetz, there's reporting about him today coming out of the Ethics Committee to see him voluntarily go to a courthouse. Andy Ogles, some of the others, as I mentioned, the head of the Freedom Caucus. Andy Biggs is with us, not Andy Gibbs. Is this becoming an episode of Saturday Night Live here? Jeannie, how is this playing nationally? Not here in the bubble where we talk about politics all day.
Yeah, if only the Bee Gees were going to be there, Joe, to sing.
Be pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's a reminder of the fact that Donald Trump truly owns this party. He snaps his fingers and everyone else jumps to attention. And I think it's also a reminder to everybody that you have somebody in Mike Johnson, let alone the other members of the Senate and the House, but he's, second in line to the presidency. And because Donald Trump demands it of him, he is willing to go and spend the day at a courthouse in New York attacking a public servant who is merely doing his job in Judge Merchan and his daughter, and, attacking the judicial system overall. This is truly Donald Trump's party from start to finish. I don't know if I have ever seen a takeover of the party of the kind that Donald Trump has masterminded. And it is, just another reflection of that. And I think that should be troubling more to Republicans, quite frankly, than it should be to Democrats.
This is really something. Producer Matt showing us a tweet here in the studio, Rick, that it's not only Bob Good who is there, the head of the Freedom Caucus, but his challenger. Remarkable. John McGuire standing right there on the Jersey barrier in front of the microphones to make a point, reinforcing the message that really nothing does matter other than supporting Donald Trump in this case, right?
Well, he is the nominee for president of our party. He is the leader of the Republican Party and has been since he got elected in 2016. So that shouldn't shock anybody. And I think it's a recognition by the campaign that this is just another campaign event, right? They're going to decriminalize this to make it basically a thing Donald Trump has to do every day as part of the campaign. And it is not unusual to turn your surrogates out for events that your candidate is doing. And if Mike Johnson was attending an event in Detroit, Michigan at a rally with Donald Trump, nobody would think otherwise. Yeah, oh my God, the speaker's not in the House of Representatives today. Yeah, he's out campaigning with the presidential candidate. In this case, because of the warped life we're leading right now, and we actually have to talk about presidential candidates sitting in court, court has now become just another venue for a political campaign. Wouldn't exactly be my strategy, but the bottom line is, if he doesn't put his own spin on it, if he doesn't pack the courthouse with his supporters, then he's going to have a bad news day. We're sitting here talking about all these important Republicans that are showing their fealty to Donald Trump. That's great for Donald Trump. Every time we talk about this, it means we're not talking about his legal peril. We're not talking about the details of the case. And it's turned into just another rally for Donald Trump.
Let's talk about the other guy in the race. Joe Biden, of course, is not in court, but has a whole lot of challenges. And we've aired them out on a daily basis here for months and months, and realizing that he has a lot of work to do to reestablish support among black voters, those who brought him in 2020. After everything that we have seen in Israel, in many cases, what black voters see as promises unkept in conversations with pollsters. This is really something, Jeannie. Jim Clyburn is hitting the road. A very important lawmaker in this case, a Democrat from South Carolina, helped to close the deal for Joe Biden. We can all agree. Maybe the most important person in his victory, as a matter of fact, in 2020. He's going on the road. He's going to be speaking to black voters in swing states. And it comes a day after we had an important conversation here on Balance of Power with Dr. Bernice King, of course, the daughter of Martin Luther King Jr. She's the CEO of the King Center, and joined us from Atlanta with her take on this. Here's what she said.
There are people in the black community who are feeling like not a lot has changed, especially economically in the black community. I think there has to be a plan and a strategy for the Biden administration to really creatively figure out how to reach, especially this next generation who's very disgruntled right now.
Very disgruntled. Is Jim Clyburn the key to unlocking this vote, Jeannie?
I think he's a really important surrogate for the Biden campaign, but I absolutely agree with what she just said. People are frustrated. They are particularly frustrated with the economy. And this includes young people, not just African American, although that is a huge component, across the board. And so I think the Biden campaign, they are trying to reach out, but I think they have to do a much better job of saying, we've made advances, but we have a lot more to do, and here's what we're going to do. I think they have to get really granular. And, one key area is housing. Do something to make housing affordable for young people. Every young person I talk to just graduated college, a few years out, and even, more than that, they cannot find affordable housing. They cannot buy homes. They cannot rent. Those kinds of things matter to people. So I think the campaign has to start to get granular, break through, and talk to African-American young people and young people across the board. The economy is on their mind, and they don't feel like they have benefited from what they keep hearing is a better economy than the rest of the world post-COVID.
Rick, I think this is really fascinating. Clyburn sat for an interview and was asked about the polls that have shown real deterioration among black voters for Joe Biden, and in many cases, an improvement for Donald Trump. Quote, "I don't know what this polling is all about," he said. "Joe Biden does not have a problem with black voters. Whatever you hear to the contrary, that's not just true," unquote. Do Democrats have a problem in that they don't believe the polls that they're seeing?
Well, if you're a Democrat strategist and you're not believing the polls you're seeing, then I think you're a really bad strategist, right? I mean, it's your obligation to look into the empirical data that you get into the campaign and make judgments based on fact, not, anecdotals or what some speaker's saying at a rally. So, I don't know how you ignore it, frankly. And if they ignore it, they're ignoring it at their own peril. I really don't quite understand the comments even that the president made. First, you never want your principal talking about polling. They're not a pundit. That's what we do. But the bottom line is you certainly don't want to basically tell everybody, I really don't care what you're telling to the pollsters. I don't care what your message is. I don't care what the voters are saying. That is a bad message. Look, I don't know why this president doesn't talk more about the economy. As Jeannie was saying, he's got something to talk about. Today, the Dow hit 40,000, right? Nobody thought that was going to happen in a Biden administration. Why aren't the corks popping in the Oval Office? Donald Trump would literally be on Wall Street today announcing that it's his 40,000 that the Dow hit. And yet this president seems completely disconnected to one of the important moving parts of people's 401ks, their retirement plans, their investments for the future. He's got a story to tell. Crickets out of the White House today on Dow hitting a record.
There's a lot to be said for that, boy. He is loath to champion what's happening in the stock market, Jeannie. But as a pollster, I want your take on this as well. Because I keep hearing a lot of people, well, you know what? The sample's broken. People lie to pollsters. Voters, they'll feel differently when they actually get in the booth and pull the curtain. Is that not a dangerous view?
It is, and you know, I don't believe it. There is absolutely no chance in heck that the Biden campaign isn't not only listening to the polls, but doing their own polls. They are seeing the same numbers we are seeing. You know, you can get polls that are off, but when you get poll after poll after poll, which shows essentially the same thing within margin of error, what we do know is this is going to be an incredibly tight election. There's no question. And they have work to do. And we've known this for months in key constituencies. That said, what else can the president say when he goes in an interview and a reporter asks him, what do you think about the polls? They all say they're not paying attention to him, but we know they are. And I think more important than talking about that, he has got to be talking about the fact that he has done a fairly good job with the economy. As Rick was just saying, he should quote Rick Davis, former McCain campaign manager. Look, he's touting my economy, and we're going to do a lot more for you, whether it's insulin, whether it's prescription drugs.
Yeah.
Sorry, Rick.
Yeah.
You know, whoever else. I mean, he's got to get granular.
I don't think you're helping Rick's business right now, Jeannie, but I hear you.
Sorry,
Jeannie
Rick.
Shanzano and Rick Davis, our signature panel. They're back in hour 2, only on Bloomberg.
From the world of politics to the world of business, this is Balance of Power. Live from Washington, D.C.
Voices are raised in the courtroom in New York. Welcome to the fastest show in politics. As cross-examination today in Donald Trump's criminal trial brings new drama and a new gaggle of Republican lawmakers there to support the former president. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kayleigh Lines in Washington. Kayleigh, you never know who you're going to see in the courtroom in New York.
No, we've seen a long list now of lawmakers from both the House and the Senate. Today, it's a lot of members of the House Freedom Caucus who are gracing the courtroom with their presence. You've got the likes of Andy Biggs, Eli Crane, Matt Gaetz, Lauren Boebert, Anna Paulina Luna. Am I missing anyone?
Did you say Matt Gaetz?
I did say Matt Gaetz.
Interesting timing for him with news on the Ethics Committee today. They're not matching, by the way, as some other groups had been matching, but they are delivering the same message, Kayleigh, that this is a weaponization of government and that the case should be thrown out.
Yeah, of course, as you're alluding to other efforts on the part of Matt Gaetz or other things that avoid him, there's a lot happening on Capitol Hill, even as some lawmakers are choosing to be in New York for at least some of the day today, including efforts to hold the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, in contempt of Congress as Joe Biden decides to use executive privilege to withhold the William Hur tape from getting in the hands of lawmakers.
We do have a lot of moving parts today. There's also a vote looming today. We thought it might happen yesterday, but today on this bill that would compel the U.S. to support Israel and essentially condemn the president's decision to withhold shipments of offensive weapons. That's likely to happen and call a lot of Democrats on the carpet before this day is out.
Yeah, and we're going to have more on what's happening inside Israel itself as you're seeing some rifts in the Netanyahu coalition government. We'll have more with our own Ian Marlowe in a moment and get some analysis on both the executive privilege question and what's happening in Donald Trump's case in trial up in New York with Robert McWhorter in just a few minutes. First, though, as always, we got to get a check on the markets with Charlie Pellet up in New York. Because, Charlie, we hit 40,000 on the Dow.
40K, another big round number for a lot of investors. For the pros, though, they will tell you it's just another number on Wall Street right now. Right to the numbers here with the Dow at 39,983, up by about 0.2%. S&P are also at a record right now, up 8 points, up 0.2%. The NASDAQ up 20. That is a gain of 0.1%. But absolutely right, record there on the Dow. 10-year, 4.36%. The 2-year, 4.78%. Spot gold today is moving lower, down 0.2%. 23.81 the ounce on gold. And crude, West Texas Intermediate, up 0.6%, 79.11 a barrel. But the bottom line here, the oldest of Wall Street's three main stock indexes, boosted by the prospect of a resilient U.S. economy, ebbing inflation, and robust corporate earnings. Speaking of which, Walmart shares are up by roughly 6% today. Walmart had another quarter of sales growth and said it now expects the full year to be slightly better than planned. Again, recapping stocks higher, S&P pushing up by 0.1%, the Dow right around 40,000. Balance of Power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kayleigh Lines.
All right, Charlie Pellet up in New York, thank you so much. I'm Kayleigh Lines alongside Joe Matthew here in Washington. And Joe, it's pretty remarkable to see another great day if you're long equity markets. You got 40,000 on the Dow. We're north of 5,300 on the S&P 500. Stocks are at record highs. And yet continually, the current incumbent administration does not get credit for anything really going well in the economy. It's one of his biggest headaches, but we know it's just one headache on a very long list.
Well, that's true. Big thumbs down on the economy in just about every poll you see. Rick Davis said it earlier, Kayleigh, if you had predicted 40,000 to coincide with this administration, people might have laughed at you in the throes of COVID, where we were when he took office. And if this were Donald Trump, he'd probably be at the New York Stock Exchange calling this his own. Yeah, that's right. No hats today, by the way. Kind of a bummer. I still have my 10,000 hats somewhere. You're alluding to other issues, though, and Israel is one of them. We've seen this take form in a lot of different ways on the campaign trail. But what's actually happening in Israel right now as we anticipate this vote today to compel the administration to provide weaponry is less to do with what's happening in Gaza now than it is what happens after the war is complete.
Yeah, whenever that after ultimately is, because of course we're still not anywhere in sight of an actual completion to this current conflict between Israel and Hamas. But we know what the U.S. has been pushing for is a two-state solution. That is not something that the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu seems quite open to at this point, but doesn't seem that everyone in the Israeli government has the same ideas on this, and you're starting to see that rift borne out in public.
Yes, very much so. Ian Marlowe is reporting on it for us. Bloomberg senior reporter covering diplomacy and geopolitics joins us at the table here on a post-war Gaza. Ian, is Benjamin Netanyahu becoming more isolated on this with time?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think he's stood alone for some time. Secretary Blinken, who I've traveled with around the region several times, has tried to corral sort of Arab partners in the region to get some sort of grand bargain to bring to Israel each time we go to the region. And each time we end up in Israel at the end of these trips, it seems like it just falls on deaf ears again. There's the day after plan is just not the priority for the Israeli government at the moment, for Netanyahu in particular. I mean, he's focused on destroying Hamas, on getting supposedly the hostages out as part of their deal, but anything that comes after that is just vague at the moment. And I think with the conflict dragging on as long as it has, 7 months now, there's a lot of impatience to see exactly what the reality is going to be like when we get to the other side of the conflict.
Well, I guess my question, Ian, is we've had a lot of conversations with people like yourself, with others who are experts in the Middle East and in Israel specifically, who have suggested that Benjamin Netanyahu has every incentive to keep this drawn out in order to preserve his own position of power. So I wonder if we do get to the point where we're talking about an after, whether or not he's actually going to be relevant to that equation. Because if we reach the after, is he still going to be in power?
He's very relevant to the equation. The question is whether he needs to be removed from power for that day after plan that the U.S. has to actually unfold the way the U.S. wants. And I think whenever U.S. officials go to Israel, they go to meet with the war cabinet, and then they meet individually with different members of the war cabinet. And I think that's a bit of a deliberate attempt, because a lot of the people in that war cabinet want to be prime minister the day Netanyahu is no longer the prime minister. And so, and that's a reality that he faces. And Bibi also faces the fact that his coalition is very ramshackle. It's the most right-wing government in Israeli history. There are people well to the right of Netanyahu himself who say, if you do, if you agree to certain things in post-war Gaza, like a two-state solution, we are going to collapse your government. And on the other side, on the left, he's actually facing a little bit of a rising discontent there too, because in the wake of October 7th, there were all of the protests about Netanyahu and the judicial reform that he had tried to push through ended. And now there's kind of vague talk now of potentially having a general strike, pushing the government to get a ceasefire deal and other things. So he's being squeezed from both ends here. And I think you're right. I think a lot of people I speak to say, what the U.S. wants won't happen with Netanyahu in charge. And also this, the day the war ends, Netanyahu is out. Right. And so he has every incentive to kind of string this out.
So with all this noise, are you hearing that any other members of his war cabinet, Yoav Gallant or otherwise, are back channeling with the White House to their own benefit?
I think anytime one of them shows up in Washington, that sort of impression gets around, and it's hard to avoid. And now, with Gallant coming out and others supporting him, directly criticizing Netanyahu and his policies, it looks like to some extent that the starter pistol has been fired to some extent.
All right. It's great stuff. Ian Marlowe, as always, who reports on diplomacy for us here at Bloomberg. Thank you so much. And it's so interesting, Joe, to consider that not only are there international pressures on Bibi Netanyahu, including President Biden being more and more outspoken in his displeasure with the Israeli government's decisions now, but facing a lot of internal pressure as well.
Absolutely. This is an important moment. I feel like we're going to look back at this period of time in the middle of May as an inflection point in this process. I figure those covering the Trump trial probably feel the same way, actually. Michael Cohen's back on cross-examination. June Grasso at Bloomberg Law is reporting that the defense probably will not let go of the reins here before the weekend because they want the jury to stay focused on their case that they can probably wrap up next week. This thing is moving.
Yeah, keeping in mind there is no court tomorrow. It's Barron Trump's high school graduation, so there will be a day off. And then we're pretty quickly coming up on the Memorial Day holiday at the end of next week. So I do wonder how logistically all of this is going to work out. But of course, they have to actually finish witness testimony and then do their closing arguments before we can get to the end of things. Right. And I just wonder what we're making of cross-examination day 2, or at least what Robert Warder is making of it. He is a criminal and constitutional law attorney. Welcome back, sir, to Balance of Power on Bloomberg TV and radio. The defense is spending a lot of time in this cross-examination trying to get Michael Cohen to admit that he has lied under oath in times past. He's been found guilty of perjury. He has spent time in prison. They're essentially trying to prove that he is willing to lie under oath. So why would the jury believe, based on this testimony, that he's not doing so again?
Well, because he's in a good position to give the information which the prosecution is built up to, and his statements are corroborated. I've said before, it doesn't matter if the jury dislikes Michael Cohen as a person. The issue is going to be whether they're going to believe what he says about Donald Trump and this situation. That is the cross-examination of him. However, the defense began with a whole different tack, which I thought was really ill-advised, where they started attacking him, saying, basically, you hate Donald Trump. And so the logical inference is you hate Donald Trump, ergo you're going to lie to do anything to get him convicted. The trouble is Mr. Cohen has a very good response, which is, I don't like Donald Trump, or I hate Donald Trump because Donald Trump has done terrible things, and I've gone along with it. And now that I've had my redemption and my little epiphany, I've seen the light, and now I'm not supporting him anymore. And by the way, when I was lying before, it was only on his behalf. That's why I'm here today. So overall, I don't think it works out all that terribly well for the defense. I have been in many trials where the government or the state has given immunity to a certain defendant to testify against the others. And the person might be a terrible person, the jury hates him. It doesn't mean they're not going to believe what they say, given the context of the case.
Robert, I wonder if raising your voice, bringing emotion as a defense attorney is a strategy. And I ask you that because Todd Blanche came in hot today. He was yelling at Michael Cohen, trying to get Cohen to yell back at him. And they had an important exchange here. Blanche highlighting this is the first time Michael Cohen has testified to having had specific telephone call, or at least one call with Donald Trump to discuss paying off Stormy Daniels. Yes, I believe I was telling the truth, Cohen said. What's the defense trying to do here?
Well, I don't think the defense is doing a particularly good job of winning the case with the jury. I think what the defense is trying to do there is make their client happy. And I think what they're doing is fulfilling their client's bigger goals. And I'm going to take kind of a unique tack on this that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about. I don't think for Donald Trump what happens in the courtroom is all that terribly important. What's important for him is what's happening outside of the courtroom and his ability to spin what's going on in the courtroom as his political strategy dictates. Look, he gets up after every court day and he complains that I should be campaigning. Well, if he's out campaigning, he's out talking to maybe a couple hundred people at a rally, maybe a few thousand, right? But he gets to talk to 5 million or more people every time he walks out of that courthouse and talks of free media coverage. And his themes are the same. So, for instance, with Michael Cohen, he can walk up and he always talks about, Trump derangement syndrome. Well, if you think about that, what that is saying is those people are crazy because they dislike me, ignoring the fact that those people dislike him because of what he does. So if your cross-examination of Michael Cohen is, oh, you just hate Donald Trump comes out and plays the same theme. And he ties it into this great conspiracy against him, and he's their savior of all the people out in TV land. That's what's important to Donald Trump. And his lawyers are accommodating this in their performance in the courtroom. And I don't think it plays well at all with the jury, but Trump has already decided it doesn't matter if he loses that trial, because by the time he gets sentenced, by the time appeals happen, he thinks he's going to be president of the United States. He's never going to serve a day in jail. I think that's Trump's overall goal, which is why he closes his eyes during most of the trial, whether he's sleeping or not.
Okay, so that's the considerations for the case involving the former president. I also want to ask you about something involving the current president, Robert, as we have had Joe Biden today exerting executive privilege over recordings from the investigation into his handling of classified documents, his conversation with special counsel Robert Hur. Merrick Garland, the Attorney General, is about to be held in contempt of Congress over this, and we have seen executive privilege now basically used to make sure that this does not, in fact, get in the hands of the lawmakers who are asking for it. We have heard a great deal of upset on the Republican side about this, including from the House Speaker, Mike Johnson. Just take a listen to what he had to say earlier.
The president is using all of his power to suppress their release. And rather than defend our closest ally at war, President Biden is using his authority to defend himself politically.
So arguably, Robert, he is using authority that is his to use should he so choose, but is he setting a dangerous precedent here by not releasing these tapes?
No, not really. Look, first of all, executive privilege belongs to the office. It doesn't belong to Joe Biden. So when all of Donald Trump and his kind of entourage and his minions say, oh, I have executive privilege, they're wrong, because only the current holder of the office has that privilege. The next person who holds that office could decide to release whatever they want, because the privilege goes with the office. Now, I think there's a good argument to be made that says, look, you already got the transcripts of what happened here. And you got a gratuitous statement from Robert Hur about, oh, he's old, he doesn't remember, which had nothing to do with his findings. Actually, the Hur findings were quite beneficial to President Biden. It draw the distinction between the two cases, President Biden's case and Donald Trump's case, in terms of retaining of documents. They're very, very different. But then he put in that gratuitous statement, which was simply to give fodder for this argument and the narrative that Joe Biden is not competent, too old, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
Utterly useless in terms of what the report was supposed to do in the prosecutorial evaluation. So, that's kind of what the privilege is. This president does have it. I assume he decides that there's no value for the American people to have this come out, certainly not a value to him. And of course, Speaker Johnson then tries to tie that into something to do with Israel at the end, I assume, by his statement that, President Biden should be more worried about our allies versus this. That's a total non sequitur. It has nothing to do with either one. But that's kind of the political game I see going on there.
He straddles criminal and constitutional law, which is why he's an important voice for us here. Robert McWhirter, we thank you for being with us, sir. As always, on Balance of Power, I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. The word on this, by the way, transcript versus tape from Jim Jordan, of course, Judiciary Chair. Changes in voice inflection and emphasis are what you need that you do not get in a transcript. But he probably will never hear that tape.
Yeah. I guess that's why people watch us on TV and listen to us on radio, don't just read us,
That's
right?
true, actually, yeah. I hear this is a good listen still, even though we're on camera. We'll have more from our panel coming up next. This is Bloomberg.
121 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. We have got the Dow, the S&P, NASDAQ off session highs with the Dow Jones Industrial Average topping 40,000 earlier today. Right now, 39,976, up 68, a gain right now of 0.2%. S&P up 4, little change now, up less than 0.1%. NASDAQ just turning negative, down a point now, down less than 0.1%. 10-year yield 4.37% with a 2-year 4.78%. Spot gold lower now by 0.2%, $23.81 the ounce, and West Texas Intermediate crude oil up 0.7%, $79.17 for a barrel of WTI. United Airlines no longer under an operational freeze put in place by government regulators, a sign of progress after a series of safety issues led to a clampdown by the FAA. Shares of UAL lower, little change today, down less than 0.1%. Bottom line here, we've got the Dow trading close to 40,000, up 42 right now, up 0.1%. We are off session highs. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington once again. Your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lines.
All right, Charlie Pellet with a look at financial markets today. Thank you so much. I'm Kaylee Lines alongside Joe Matthew in Washington. And we know that decisions out of Washington often do have the ability to impact financial markets, certain stocks, certain ETFs, like, say, rescheduling marijuana. I noticed today MJ up nearly 6% after just moments ago, President Biden takes to X. Too many lives have been upended by our failed approach to marijuana. So today, the Justice Department is taking the next step to reclassify marijuana from a Schedule 1 to a Schedule 3 drug under federal law. It's happening, Joe.
This is a big deal. It is actually happening. We've been talking about this for a very long time. And for the president to do a direct-to-video, direct-to-camera statement on this says a lot about the demographics he's trying to appeal to here, i.e. young people. MSOS is the other ETF that's specific to U.S. cannabis companies impacted by this. That's up over 8% right now. As our buddy Nathan Dean likes to say at Bloomberg Intelligence, the pot stocks have hot sauce on them, and they go crazy in both directions. So let's see if this holds.
Yeah, I guess we will. But to your point, it's not a coincidence in all likelihood, Joe, that this is happening in the middle of an election cycle.
That's right. Not to mention the fact that we're actually waiting for news on safe banking. There has been an effort to get this done, largely by Democrats, but some Republicans are on board as well. Let's assemble our panel to get their take on this and all the other stories that we're covering today. Rick Davis and Jeannie Shanzano join us, Bloomberg Politics contributors here on Bloomberg TV and radio. We didn't see this one coming, guys, but here we are. Jeannie, it's just another. You can talk about forgiving student loan debt or some of the other ways that Joe Biden has tried to appeal to younger voters. In this case, does it work? And with whom?
You know, I don't see this as changing the trajectory of the election. You know, marijuana legalization is something, to your point, young people support in overwhelming numbers, and they long have. That said, it doesn't usually rank at the top of their list. Still at the top of their list is the economy. So I think this is important, as you guys were just talking about.
But this has to do with promises kept, doesn't it, Jeannie? Promises kept on the campaign in 2020.
It does have to do with that. I'm still not convinced it will change support. I think much more important is going to be his taking on economic issues that matter to these young people, and they are enormous. So I think this is a positive step. And you're right, it does meet a campaign promise, although I just really still don't see it as going all the way to change votes, if you will.
Well, fair enough. Obviously, young people are one demographic in which President Biden is seeing turn away from him. Rick, another is black voters, and he is arguably trying to take some corrective measure in that regard as well this week, as he today is meeting with family members in the Brown versus Board of Education case. He'll be doing another event here in D.C. at the African American History Museum later this week. He's giving the commencement address at Morehouse this weekend. Does any of that go far enough? How much work does he still have to do?
Yeah, look, I think that we heard from Dr. King this week that you got to walk the walk. You got to be there all the time. It's not just an election year issue. And I think she's exactly right. I can't imagine anybody walking the walk more than Joe Biden has. But again, I mean, I have to echo what Jeannie just said. I mean, this is all about the economic situation that young black especially urban males, find themselves in. And it's not good. And they're blaming the Biden administration, right? They didn't have as many pressures on them economically during the Trump administration. They had other cultural challenges that exacerbated themselves in the Trump administration. But for whatever reason, those seem to have, fallen by the wayside. And now it's a battle with Joe Biden over the economic well-being of the black community. And these are core Democratic voters. So if he loses them, he's really got a problem with his base. It's not just swing voters anymore. And I would say, I don't think the cannabis issue plays out really very much. I consider it a feel-good issue, right? In other words, it fulfills a promise, it does what you need to do to sort of get over it. But there are very few young voters, very few urban voters, very few voters who, are in the Biden coalition who are going to vote for Donald Trump unless he, legalizes pot, right? That's just not a voter that exists in any poll I've ever seen. So the challenge with black voters this week, he's showing some leg on it, but the question is, can he meet that challenge by being able to at least articulate a better economic opportunity for that community in the next 4 years? And again, where's the plan for the next 4 years economically? All we hear about is getting past tomorrow.
Well, speaking of a feel-good issue, how about a presidential pardon? Not for those convicted of smoking marijuana, but for Donald Trump. Mitt Romney, of course, the former standard-bearer of the Republican Party, thinks that's exactly what Joe Biden should do and should have already done. He talked about it in an interview. Let's listen.
I think President Biden made an enormous error. He should have fought like crazy to keep this prosecution from going forward. It was a win-win for Donald Trump. Had I been President Biden, when the Justice Department brought out indictments, I would have immediately pardoned him. I'd have pardoned President Trump.
That was in an interview with MSNBC. Jeannie, what do you think about this? I'm pretty sure Joe Biden was not about to pardon Donald Trump. What would the reaction be?
I'm baffled by this for several reasons, but let's just start with one, which is the fact that while a pardon can reach to the federal cases, those federal cases are not going forward, apparently, in all likelihood, before the campaign. For the election, rather. The only one that has is the state case. And of course, Joe Biden has no say in what the state of New York does or the state of Georgia. So I'm not quite clear on what Romney's getting there. What I do agree with him on is the fact that Democrats have to fight Donald Trump at the ballot box and not rely on the courts. That said, there's no evidence that Joe Biden has been part and parcel of this prosecution of Donald Trump. So I don't know how he stops it other than getting involved, which no president should do.
But one of the other things that Senator Romney said, Rick, is that this is a win-win for Donald Trump. Does he not have a point there that so far the prosecution of the former president has only served him in his campaign for the White House?
Yeah, hindsight is 20/20 vision. I think you can now look at and say advantage Trump when it comes to at least the current status of his legal problems. If he doesn't win an election and he gets convicted and he winds up serving time in prison, I don't think anybody's going to say that. But that's not where we are today.
Fair enough.
And I would say very clearly that Senator Romney isn't claiming that Joe Biden has anything to do with these prosecutions. If anything, I think he would say that this proves that no one is above the law. But I think what he's trying to get to is a return to civility, a return to a dialogue that is not so detrimental to our national interests. And that only gets achieved by people making sacrifices. And in this case, the sacrifice would have been the president's to basically reach out with the power that he has to grant a pardon to somebody who highly likely at the time was going to be the nominee of the party. And I think there's something about national unity and rising above it and serving causes greater than your own political self-interest that would have inured greatly to Biden's advantage. But that's not where we are. And that gives the cudgel to Donald Trump to then use his prosecution against Joe Biden. And so that's just fair, right? I mean, it's his Justice Department that has indicted him while he's a presidential candidate. And, arguably, he's done things that are wrong that have inured to this. He is a court of law going to decide whether he's guilty of these things or not. But does that really advance the national dialogue the way we would normally want to see it? And I doubt if any voter would say, yeah, that's Republican or Democrat alike, that this is a good place where we found ourselves.
It's really interesting, Jeannie. What's your thought on that to come back around? Could Joe Biden actually turn a few independent voters his way, just the optics of doing what appears to be best for the nation?
I don't think it would change voters' minds. I think he would probably risk losing as many as he may gain in the middle. And I think, you know, what Rick is talking about, I think is an important point. I don't think it would help Joe Biden, in other words, politically at this point in terms of the election, but for the better interest of the public good, it may be something worth considering. But again, this prosecution, we're seeing the hush money, is a state court. He has got no reach there. He could take action potentially on the federal case. It's very unusual to do before the man has even been convicted, and nothing would happen before the election. So, you know, I see Senator Romney's point, but I think it's a little bit too late to think about something along those lines.
All right, Jeannie Shanzano and Rick Davis, our signature political panel, thank you so much. And it is an important thing to consider here, Joe. While Donald Trump wouldn't be able to pardon himself if he wins re-election in the state cases, just the federal ones, we don't even know if the federal cases will ever move forward.
That's true.
Delayed indefinitely at this point.
We have to remind ourselves that we're still waiting for a very important ruling from the Supreme Court on presidential immunity that may or may not lead to a Jack Smith January 6th trial. That would be a potential game changer.
Yeah, well, we'll know, we think, by June 30th when it's the end of the term, but they could always kick it back down to a lower court and just elongate this process any further. We'll, of course, keep you updated when we get news. We just don't have it quite yet. There's a lot of other news out there, though. World and national news with Amy Morris in the 99.1 newsroom here in Washington is up next. Amy?
Thank you, Kaylee. President Biden has exerted executive privilege over recordings of his interview with special counsel Robert Hur at the center of a Republican effort to hold Attorney General Merrick Garland in contempt of Congress. House Judiciary Committee Chair Jim Jordan says he does not trust those written transcripts.
The department's refusal to produce the audio recordings of special counsel Hur's interviews with President Biden amounts to a demand that the committee trust that the department created and produced interview transcripts are actually accurate and complete.
The White House says the GOP is being political. Donald Trump's criminal hush money trial could wrap up soon. Prosecutors have indicated they plan to rest their case once Michael Cohen finishes his testimony. Cohen, Trump's former attorney and so-called fixer, is now on the stand for a third day. Now, the defense has said it will only call a handful of witnesses. They have not said yet whether Donald Trump will testify. Justice Juan Merchan has told the jury that court might actually have to be in session next Wednesday. We're watching that. Meanwhile, outside the courthouse, about a dozen House Freedom Caucus members criticized the trial and the gag order on the former president. And looking at the PGA now, Xander Schauffele has just broken the PGA Championship scoring record with a 62 and has tied a major championship record. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
It's 1:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. After eclipsing the 40,000 threshold, the Dow now only up by 10 points, 39,917. Little change right now. We have got the S&P 500 index also little changed. In the red, down now by half a point, while NASDAQ is down 7, a drop there of less than 0.1%. Bottom line here, U.S. stock market giving up earlier gains. 10-year, 4.36%. The 2-year, 4.78%. Spot gold down 0.2%, 23.80 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude holding on to a gain of 0.8%, 79.23 for a barrel of WTI. Those so-called meme stocks fading again for a second day. GameStop, case in point, down another 22%. Also trading lower, AMC Entertainment down now by 10%. Again, recapping, little change for the U.S. equity market. Right now, the S&P up by just about half a point. Balance of power continues now. Back we go to Washington. Once again, your hosts, Joe Matthew and Kaylee Lyons.
All right, Charlie, we thank you. Big day in the markets here. We'll get back with Charlie before the end of the hour to see how we're doing on this 40,000, Dow 40,000 day. It's kind of amazing to see this happen, Kaylee, as we were discussing earlier. Is there a tweet or a post from the White House on this yet? Because Donald Trump would have been playing this up big time.
Yeah.
And it would probably resonate in the polls. And I only ask that because the president has struggled to connect the dots on all things economy. And I realize they're two different things. What do you have?
Biden-Harris HQX account.
Yes.
13 minutes ago, put out a new ad about Trump in 2020 saying the stock market would collapse if Joe Biden won, noting that the Dow did just hit 40,000, the highest level ever recorded in history. So they heard you,
They took
Joe.
a swing at it. Yeah. I mean, we've been on the air for a little bit here. I'm glad to always know that they're listening. Glad that you're with us as well on Bloomberg TV and radio. As we come off a couple of brutal days of testimony, day 2 in the Senate today, wrapping up, Kaylee, for the head of the FDIC. And of course, this has everything to do with a report that was submitted last week, an independent report highlighting a toxic workplace culture at the agency. And there are resounding calls on Capitol Hill for Mr. Gruenberg's resignation. We heard from him a bit earlier in the broadcast. Bloomberg News spoke with Senator Catherine Cortez Masto of Nevada about her take on this. Here's what she told us earlier on Capitol Hill.
It addresses the workplace culture and the structure when it comes to protecting these employees. And so those recommendations, to me, that's the action items that they need to be taking, and they need to be implementing them, every single one of them, not questioning them like the previous report under the previous chair questioned some of the recommendations that were made and challenged them. That should not happen in this case. They should be saying yes to every single recommendation and implement it. To me, those are part of the action items. Those federal employees need to see.
Democratic Senator Catherine Cortez Masto on Capitol Hill earlier, and we go there now live, where we're joined, I'm pleased to say, by Republican Senator Joni Ernst of Iowa, who also has introduced legislation that relates to the issues at the FDIC. Senator, thank you so much for joining us here on Bloomberg TV and radio. In the face of the reports like the one we have gotten out of the FDIC, you, together with a Democratic colleague, Kirsten Gillibrand, have introduced the No Taxpayer-Funded Pensions for Sex Criminals Act. Essentially, this legislation would prohibit sex criminals from collecting taxpayer-funded pensions. My question, Senator, is the chairman has not been accused, actually, of any crimes, just perhaps having a role in allowing this kind of environment to continue at the FDIC. And there's been a lot of calls for his resignation. Does he deserve to collect a pension?
Well, and no, he has not perpetrated any of the acts that are covered by this legislation. So two separate issues. One is he is a very poor leader. He enabled this type of culture to occur at the FDIC. So I'm actually calling on him to either resign or President Joe Biden should fire him. But second is the act that I have drawn up with my colleague, Senator Kirsten Gillibrand of New York, that would stop taxpayer-funded pensions going to those that are convicted of sexual harassment. So two separate items, but man, they come together in a nexus at the FDIC, because we have seen those that exist within the FDIC pushing sexual harassment, unwanted sexual contact, illicit photos texted to females within the FDIC. So I think there is a lot to uncover here. We saw that independent report, over 340 pages of horrible, horrible frat boy type behavior happening at the FDIC.
Yeah, there's been a lot of references, Senator. It's good to see you again. We haven't caught up since we were in Iowa. A lot of talk around Washington about locker room talk and locker room behavior, and it was just in May of last year that a jury found Donald Trump liable for sexual abuse. If your bill became law, would that remove his pension?
Well, it's quite possible, but what we're focused on is those that are out there, those that have been convicted of that, and then, yes, they would have their pensions stripped away. It's a behavior that has to stop. So we see this in the FDIC. We see these federal employees that are really suffering. And again, I want to go back to the FDIC chairman and how he allowed this behavior to continue. Complaints were made to the FDIC, complaints that he either knew about or just simply dismissed. He himself had bad behavior, yelling at employees, throwing objects, all very, very poor exhibits of leadership or lack thereof. But again, bad behavior, we need to make sure that those that are in leadership positions in the federal government know and understand that they can't take advantage of their employees. If they are convicted, they will lose their taxpayer-funded pensions. End of story.
Well, Senator, if I could just go back to the fact that you just said it's quite possible if this were to become law that Donald Trump could not continue to collect a federal pension. He wouldn't be eligible for that, but still should be seen as qualified to collect a presidential salary back in the Oval Office come January of next year?
Well, different issues, because this is an elected position. If people want him to be the president of the United States, and I fully believe that he will be the president of the United States, then we will see him serving. Again, a little different issue, a little different take on it. These are people that are hired by the federal government, working in an environment where they are assaulting other employees of the federal government. It is up to the federal government to protect those employees. One way we do that and we make sure that this behavior doesn't happen is by letting them know up front, if you are convicted of these crimes, you will be stripped of that pension.
We're spending time with Senator Joni Ernst on Balance of Power. I'm Joe Matthew alongside Kaylee Lyons in Washington. I want to ask you about a couple of other issues while we have you here, Senator, including the idea of raising tariffs on China. This is something that Joe Biden chose to do this week while maintaining the Trump tariffs on China. And it's something that Bloomberg discussed with Jamie Dimon, of course, from J.P. Morgan Chase. Let's listen to what he said.
I think it's the right thing for America to fully and deeply engage with China, competitively. Every nation is going to do what's in their own interest for national security. So should America. We should define that fairly and properly. If there's unfair trade, negotiate that or do whatever you need to do. But engagement is the right thing to do.
Engagement is the right thing to do. Senator, how do you have both?
It's really difficult, but we have seen President Donald Trump do the tariffs. He focused very heavily on correcting the actions for my Iowa farmers, and I felt that he was very strong on that. We see now President Joe Biden doing this, and what he is trying to do, he's focusing more on electric vehicles and chips and not focusing necessarily so much on my farmers in Iowa. But certainly when it comes to China, we have to be very cautious. We want to disengage where we can on items of national security importance, whether that's pharmaceuticals or items that go into our defense industry. I think it's extremely important. But we also need to make sure that we're looking out for our interests here in the United States, that we continue to develop domestic manufacturing. We need to quit leaning on China. They are bad, bad trade partners. And we have seen this with, I'll give an example of my Iowa farmers. China will negotiate on some soybeans coming from the state of Iowa. Those soybeans are shipped by our Iowa farmers. They're heading over the Pacific Ocean. China will cancel the order. then renegotiate for a lower price on soybeans or whatever other commodity it might be. And the Iowa farmers are stuck with it. This is where President Trump really stood up and did the right thing by the Iowa farmers, correcting that action with those tariffs. So we're going to see more of this. We're going to see a lot about this talked about before we go into the election cycle. I wish that we would see more engagement, pushing back on China, whether it's President Trump, whether it is President Joe Biden.
Well, Senator, as you talk about the farmers in your state of Iowa, are you not concerned that if this is pushed too far, these tariffs go too far, that they could fall victim to retaliation from China?
Yes, this is one thing that was brought up again when President Trump was in the Oval Office. I had an Iowa farmer that actually laid it out, and he said, you know, he slapped his hand on the table, and he said, I know this is going to hurt for a while, but he said, I am so thankful for President Donald Trump. He's actually standing up for American farmers. He is correcting this action. So while the pain may be short term, we are going to find other outlets for corn, for soybeans, for pork, for beef, for poultry. We are going to find those other outlets. America can produce. China needs it more than America needs China consuming it.
Senator, I'm getting the hook here, but I just have to ask you quickly in our last couple of seconds, are we going to get a new farm bill this year? You keep referring to my farmers, or will they extend the one in place?
Yes. Oh, Joe, we are really struggling with the farm bill this year, and it is a $1.5 trillion price tag in the United States Senate, but only about 14 to 15% of that goes to farm programs. We need to rename the bill. We're not going to pass it this year. We'll take another shot early next year. We'll have to extend the 2018 farm bill. It's a disappointment for sure. It's a disappointment.
Please come back and talk to us about this. It's important to our listeners and viewers, just like it is to you. Senator Joni Ernst, we thank you for the time today here on Bloomberg and Balance of Power. Fascinating, a couple of unexpected answers there, especially when it came to Donald Trump.
Yeah, saying that potentially if the bill she's introduced becomes law, he could lose his federal pension for having been found in a civil court liable for sexual abuse. But she obviously still has full-throated endorsement for the former president. She'd like to see him be president.
So with that and all the shenanigans that we're seeing in the courthouse in New York, the storyline remains intact that Donald Trump has a more organized, a more mature campaign apparatus, and they're doing business differently now than they did the last two times. And that's what we wanted to talk about with Saleha Mosin, who's featuring this in the new Big Take DC podcast.
Yeah, she, of course, is the host. She's also senior Washington correspondent for us here at Bloomberg and is joining us now in studio. So this is the third go-around for Donald Trump, 2016, 2020, 2024. What makes this cycle different in terms of the organization itself?
It's a lot more organized. In 2016, now we have to remember that was the first time Donald J. Trump ever ran for public office. A lot of times when we have a first-time presidential candidate, they've run for mayor, they've run for a Congress position, they've run for governor. He had never run for anything, and he won in 2016 with the Electoral College vote, but it was chaos. He had Corey Lewandowski is the campaign manager one day, then Kellyanne Conway, then Paul Manafort. Now, after lessons of chaos in 2016, losing in 2020, with 2024, it's a steady ship, but he has great poll numbers. So he's in a great mood. He zipped up the GOP nomination in March, which was their target from the get-go, months before he needed to. And in all the key swing state polls, he's ahead of Joe Biden.
Is the campaign organizing these courtroom visits that we're seeing today? It's members of the Freedom Caucus. We even saw the Speaker of the House. Those vying for vice president are showing up at the courthouse in New York. Rick Davis was shrewd earlier talking about, look, if this were any other campaign, the candidate would be going to where these people are. But since he can't, they're coming to him. Would that have happened in a different apparatus? Is that this campaign at work?
Absolutely. We've got Susie Wiles, who's the campaign manager, Chris LaSavita, who is a senior advisor, pulling these strategy sessions, coming up with a strategy that seems to really be working because they have to look at the candidate's calendar. Right now, he is in a courtroom day after day. There's no cameras. There's no recorders. How is he supposed to talk to the public? Well, one day on his way to the courtroom in Manhattan, he stopped by a construction site and signed a bunch bunch of MAGA hats for workers. Another day, he came out on the court steps and touted his really great poll numbers.
Well, of course, we got news this week that he will have more opportunity to address the American people, or at least those who decide to watch a presidential debate on CNN on June 27th, the opportunity to actually debate Joe Biden. But that's Donald Trump up there alone on that stage. Will we see as much discipline with the candidate as we've seen with the campaign when he has an option to speak freely?
Keely, you're honing in on the question at hand. What this campaign is doing, they're letting Trump be himself. There is no one trying to curtail his style. His rhetoric is still as bombastic as it was before, and his supporters like it. His rhetoric is just the way his supporters want to hear him.
Big Take DC podcast drops a little bit later on today. What else are we going to hear? Who are you talking to?
We talked to Anthony Scaramucci, who was the White House communications director for 11 days, and then Bloomberg's Nancy Cook.
So the podcast is longer than one Scaramucci.
It is long.
I just want to make sure that's great. We're loving this. Thanks for joining, as always. It's every Thursday. If you haven't subscribed, do it already. Just like when you do to ours on Balance of Power, Apple, Spotify, wherever you do your podcasts.
Indeed. It's a great topic this week. This is something we've talked a lot about, Joe, this idea that this campaign is very different to the way we've seen Donald Trump campaigning in the past, which, of course, he's done twice.
Well, we're going to carry on this conversation in the later edition of Balance of Power. Starts at 5 o'clock Washington time. Thanks to Robert McWhirter, Senator Joni Ernst, our panel, Rick Davis, and Jeannie Shanzano. We're just getting started here in Washington, and it's almost time for Bloomberg Business Week in New York.
Bloomberg Business Week. Insight from the reporters and editors who bring you America's most trusted business magazine. Plus, global business, finance, and tech news as it happens. Bloomberg Business Week with Carol Masser and Tim Stenevec on Bloomberg Radio.
And a very good afternoon, everybody. Live on radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals. This is Bloomberg Business Week on this Thursday, May
16th.
16th.
Yeah.
Man,
What do you think?
half of
Time
May
flies.
over. Time flies when
It's
you're
your
having
Friday.
fun.
You're gone tomorrow, so
I am in
you're like in
such a
relax
Friday
mode.
mode.
Yeah.
I'm Carol Masser. He's Tim Stenevec. You get a record. You get a record. You get a record.
Oh, boy, thank you.
feel like it's records all around this week. Dow hitting 40,000. We're back below that. We'll talk about the markets in just a moment. Got the S&P heading toward its 24th record this year. We'll see if we get across the finish line on that. But that is, Tim, kind of our broad market backdrop.
Okay, well, we also got the big bank CEO that everybody listens to. We're talking none other than Jamie Dimon of JP Morgan Chase. He's going to weigh in on the market run-up, inflation, and more. You're going to hear from him in just a few minutes.
Plus, we've got two gainers on your radar on this Thursday. Attention, Walmart shoppers. Thank you, Tim, for that line. Walmart shares are the #1 gainer in the S&P 500 today. Walmart surging, topping $500 billion when it comes to its market cap for the first time. We're going to dig into the reasons why. And then we have Chubb.
Yeah, also rallying today thanks to a buyout boost by buying boost, I should say, by Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway. We got that news late yesterday. We're going to dig into a little bit why the Oracle of Omaha, as they call him, is buying shares of Chubb.
They love insurance, right?
They
have
really
for a
do.
long time. Hey, we're also going to get into the cover story of Bloomberg Business Week, a new issue out. It's about 23andMe's fall as mass market genetic testing fails to take off. Great deep dive into that country and really that industry overall.
And one more thing, Coca-Cola, well, we've got a problem, at least when it comes to those bottle caps. We'll tell you what's going
You can
on.
get hurt in the process. Kind of, maybe not. All right, we're going to get into it. First up, though, let's get a check on that trade today. Charlie Pellet is here. And Charlie, offer highs of the session.
Indeed, and perhaps the big story today, Dow 40,000, covering it on the way up. We'll cover it on the way down. Right now, we have got the Dow up 21 points, holding on to a gain here, 39,931 on the Dow. S&P getting kind of sloppy in the past hour of trading, swinging between gains and losses. Still looking at a 2-point gain to 53.10, up less than 0.1%. NASDAQ just about flat on the day now, higher by 2 points. 10-year, 4.36%. 2-year, 4.78%. Spot gold down 0.2%, 23.81 the ounce. While West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.9%, 79.31 for a barrel of WTI. Going to be talking a lot more about Walmart. It did have another quarter of sales growth and said it now expects the full year to be slightly better than planned as the big box retailer attracts consumers looking for essentials and discounts. Right now, we got Walmart shares higher. Walmart up now by 7%. GameStop down 22% right now. AMC Entertainment as meme stock sell-off. AMC down by 11%. Recapping, S&P higher, could see a record today, up 1 point right now, little changed. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Well, all right, that's your market setup on this Thursday. Let's get to Walmart shares. As we talked about at the top, surging, pushing the retailer's market value over $500 billion for the first time after it posted stronger than expected first quarter earnings and boosted its annual sales and profit forecast. So we wanted to know more. It's the e-commerce business, it's the store business, it's the average ticket spend. There's a lot going on, Tim, when we talk about Walmart.
Also the outlook. We welcome Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Retail Staples and Packaged Food Analyst Jen Bartashis at Bloomberg Intelligence headquarters in Princeton. Okay, Jen, break it down for us. Investors certainly loved it, but what did we learn about the business today, and what can it tell us about the broader economy?
So we learned a couple of things about the business today. The first is that some of the investments Walmart has been making are really starting to play out. They're able to consistently grow operating income ahead of revenue, which is a great story for them to be able to tell. They're gaining market share, and ultimately their e-commerce businesses are really showing signs of taking off. So all of these things together really are working for the company. We're also seeing that consumers are still value focused, and Walmart is offering that value to people, not just from a price perspective, but also from things like convenience. And that's what's helping to draw in some of those higher income households that they've been talking about.
Well, when it comes to what they expect in terms of adjusted earnings, coming at the high end or slightly above its original guidance of $223 to $237 per share, revenue growth of 3 to 4% for the full year. Was it analysts just too low on it, or that's kind of what the business was, and Walmart's just surprising and doing better than everybody really thought? And they thought maybe.
Yeah, well, Walmart, came into the year with their initial guidance a little bit conservative because it was really unsure where the consumer was and where they would be. So, today they nudged up that guidance a little bit. They're at the high end of their previously stated range. I wouldn't be surprised if at second quarter earnings they actually adjust their guidance for the full year. But it's really, they're staying a little bit conservative just because there are a lot of factors at play that affect consumers still.
Listen, they're massive, right? And they certainly play into a certain sect, I would say. I think it's fair to say of the consumer, although we've known, coming off the pandemic and just other times that we feel like their customer base has widened out. What do we know really about the demographics of who is the Walmart shopper?
Well, historically, you would have considered about 50% of their customer base to be in that lower income household type of demographic. But today, what they talked about was that when they divide their demographics between those who earn under $50,000, those $50,000 to $100,000, and households over $100,000 a year, it's about a third of their business each. So that's a meaningful shift in the way that their consumer base. And it really does bode well for them going forward that they should be able to retain some of those higher income consumers who tend to spend more and they tend to buy more discretionary items as well.
Hey, Jen, those higher income consumers, those folks who earn more than $100,000 a year, are they flocking to Walmart right now because they're looking for value, or is Walmart doing a good job of offering items that those wealthier households tend to go out and shop for? Which one is it, if you were to say it's one of these things?
Well, I would say initially, when we had really high food inflation, it was the price draw. But Walmart's been investing in upgrading their stores, improving the customer experience. And once you got those customers in the door, they saw that there were other changes that were happening with regards to merchandising that is appealing to them. So it's a story of two parts. The first part was price, and now it's also about service and convenience. That leads into that omni-channel e-commerce growth of over 21% from a global basis. People like the idea of being able to order, have it shipped to their house, or pick it up at curbside, and that's really driving a lot of the interest in the company.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that. How is Walmart Plus doing, especially when compared to Amazon Prime? How do you look at these two programs together?
Well, it's a good question. When I look at Walmart Plus, it's really about locking in loyalty. The majority of the use is for things that are shipped to home and a lot of grocery orders. You can order unlimited amounts, and have it delivered or shipped. When it comes to Amazon, they did launch a new subscription program for grocery at $9.99 a month on top of your annual membership Prime fee. But so clearly, Amazon is seeing some of the success that Walmart has had with that subscription model, and see that there is a convenience play to be had with consumers who are interested in that sort of service.
Are the folks who are using buy online, pick up in store, is it true that they're going in and actually buying more once they get to the store? Because that's a way that companies hope, that brick and mortar companies hope to get folks inside the store to buy more.
It does happen more often than you would think, because people are on their way to the store and they think, oh, I forgot to add this to my order. I'm just going to hop in and grab it. And when they're in the store, then that adds like three things by the time they get to the checkout. So it is something that actually really does happen. It's not with every order, but it's more often than most people would think.
All right, sounds really rosy. And it, they also saw traffic and unit increases that helped out sales growth, grocery business fueling the growth over at Walmart. Yet they did cut workers, right? They are very cognizant of higher costs generally, I guess, across their world as well as kind of everybody's world. So any commentary or color around that?
Yeah, sure. Walmart is very much an everyday low-cost provider as well as an everyday low-price provider. And part of that is really being disciplined with regards to costs. Now, we saw announcements in the last month about things like closing down the health clinics. We saw the announcements about corporate job cuts. Those are, in fact, likely related to a certain degree. But Walmart is, one of the things they do is they're not afraid to try something, but if it doesn't pan out, they pull back and they reassess. And so some of those cuts that we saw are really a reflection of that attitude towards their business.
Hey, if there's one business that you think that we should be kind of keeping on our radar, that maybe Walmart's going to be moving into aggressively, that could move the needle top and bottom line, just 20 seconds left, what would it be? I thought I heard you say fintech on TV earlier, but I don't know if that's it.
If we look to what Walmart's doing in their international segment with fintech, There's a lot to be excited about. And so whatever they can adapt and bring more into the U.S. and what they're trying to do with fintech here could be a catalyst.
All right, interesting stuff as always. Hey, Jen, thank you so much. Bloomberg Intelligence Senior Retail Staples and Packaged Food Analyst, our own Jen Batarshis, with the rundown on everything to do with Walmart today. Walmart rallying, so too is the stock of Chubb.
Yeah, up more than 4% as we speak. We mentioned it late yesterday, the stock popping after hours. This as Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway unveiled a $6.7 billion stake in the insurer, ending months of suspense over its mystery position in a financial firm previously concealed in regulatory filings. We did get this yesterday, Berkshire disclosing it in a filing, reflecting its positions at the end of the first quarter. Of course, Carol Buffett and Berkshire deeply familiar when it comes to the insurance industry.
All right, let's get more on it. The positioning, Chubb specifically, the Buffett, the Berkshire universe in insurance. With us is Bloomberg Intelligence Property and Casualty Insurance Senior Analyst Matthew Palazzola. He is here in studio. All right, shouldn't be surprised. What's significant, or should we be surprised about this?
I mean, look, I was a little surprised.
Why?
So we knew it was a financial company, and there were only a certain amount of financial companies big enough that they could have took a position in that they would have held confidential. So it was floating out there. I mean, they're businesses. They're both obviously big insurance businesses.
Yeah.
When you dig into it a little bit deeper, though, the Berkshire insurance businesses are personal auto is huge for them, not that big for Chubb. Reinsurance, very big for Berkshire, also not that big for Chubb. So kind of complementary businesses. When I heard it, the first thing that came to my mind was the Charlie Munger quote, better to own a great company at a fair price rather than a fair company at a great price. Not to comment on the valuation of Chubb, but that's really what stuck out to me. Chubb's really the cream of the crop in terms of global insurance companies.
Why is that?
So their margins are a lot better, their underwriting margins. The CEO is Evan Greenberg. He's the son of Hank Greenberg, who's a titan of the industry, CEO of AIG. He's, in my opinion, the best CEO in the industry, right? He, to the size of this company and the global scale of this company, he knows things down to the business line and runs it kind of, with an iron fist, I would say. So their underwriting margins are better. They're huge, and they still grow a lot more than other companies.
Do you think this purchase, like Greenberg would have known about this purchase, or would this come as a surprise to him too?
You know, I don't know, Tim. I would assume they probably talk a little bit. I mean, like the first thing that came to my mind was Berkshire's got $188 billion in cash. They're trying to hunt for one last elephant. If there was anything to do like that, obviously it would have to be a lot of conversation.
So, we've done stories, Matt, about insurance, the insurance industry and concerns and places where people are either paying a lot or insurance companies don't even want to insure related to climate change.
I mean, I know folks in California who this week were
Right.
told that their insurance was being dropped.
Yeah. And so it feels like there's some strains and stresses in certain parts of the insurance industry. Does any of this give that exposure to Berkshire Hathaway?
Not really, Carol. So Berkshire, Ajit Jain, who's the head of the insurance operations at Berkshire, right, another titan of the industry, made a great point at the annual meeting, which we kind of know, but it was really good to hear.
And you were there, by the way.
I was there,
yeah.
on the floor. He had said, look, climate change is a risk. It's happening, right? And Tim, you mentioned these companies pulling out of California. That's happening. That's, I think, only going to get worse, to be honest. But the great part about our insurance business, the insurance business, is we can reprice on an annual basis. So we know what's happening. We're not really locked in long term. Some personal contracts are 6 months. So they kind of have these opportunities to either exit lines of business or reprice. Not to say it's not a risk, but the industry's adapting to it.
Again, reminding everyone, you're talking about this from the perspective of an insurance company, not the customer of an insurance company.
Correct.
Which you likely are, because we all are customers of insurance companies. But I think it's fair to say that a lot of customers are feeling the pain of this repricing every 6 months for auto, for example, when they get these pretty shocking bills that show that, okay, wait a second, there is pricing power here because I really have no other choice. Everything's getting expensive.
Yeah, I mean, and look, P&C insurance is a product that's sold, not bought, right? It's bought, not sold, sorry. You have to buy it, right? You need it. Auto, and people have been feeling that across the country. Home, I think, it's been across the country as well, but there's more in pain points in like California, Florida. I think on the auto side, auto insurance companies love to compete away excess profits.
Yeah.
The problem was there weren't any profits recently. So I think what's going to happen maybe a little bit later in the year is you're probably going to see some relief on the auto side, maybe not so much on the home. But to your question, Carol, this is
different.
It's different. Chubb does high-end homes, and that business hasn't necessarily been great for them, but it's not any kind of risk for Berkshire.
I do also wonder, one of the things coming off of Milken, and I feel like Bloomberg has done some great reporting over the last month or so of just, is the private credit world kind of getting access to some of the insurance companies, their excess cash that's on hand, that they have lots of cash. And I just wonder, is that part of the play? Is that part of the returns potentially for Berkshire? Or is that kind of a little bit not something that, a little bit more risk than that they would maybe play into?
I would say probably not for Berkshire. I mean, the interesting thing, right, is Berkshire takes insurance float and invests it aggressively.
On their
right?
own.
On their own. And that's unique. And other companies that have tried to do that have failed miserably, right? And whether it's trying to do it through a hedge fund or in any other way.
So do you assume, or are you thinking at all, that you mentioned the big cash pile? All right, so Chubb's got about $106 billion, $107 billion market cap. I mean, does eventually Berkshire want to buy it all out, or does it really need to?
I don't know. So we were saying Buffett looking for this elephant-sized acquisition. The thing there is, we talked about CEO Evan Greenberg of Chubb. I can't imagine him working for anyone, right, necessarily. He took Ace and Chubb, put them together, two huge companies, and that actually went rather smoothly.
Yeah.
Perhaps if you were to say to him, hey, you can take over once Ajit Jain kind of steps down, you could take over this behemoth of an insurance, monster. I could see that being attractive, but Berkshire's not one to bid up. They're also not one to go hostile.
Yeah.
And Chubb's not one to say, okay, let's just take a one and done price. So I think there'll be some friction.
Should we look in recent years to what Berkshire Hathaway did with Occidental, sort of buying more and more of the company over a few months and coming out and saying, okay, we're not going to buy the entire company, but there's a chance that they could buy more than, 6.4% of the company?
Yeah, I think they could own more. Again, they have so much cash, they don't know what to do with it. They said they weren't going to buy Occidental. I would assume Chubb may even come out and say something like, look, we're not going to be acquired. But I could see them stepping up the ownership in it.
All right, 20 seconds since we're at the meeting. Is there something else you think that might be floating around for Buffett and Berkshire to put some more money to?
I don't know if they're going to do anything massive. They talked about a Canadian opportunity they were looking at, and I hadn't really seen much more than that. I think the loss of Charlie Munger kind of puts a damper on big moves, to be honest. But who knows? You never know. I don't want to, say it
some
until it
time.
happens.
Yeah, exactly. Good stuff. Interesting. As we said, shares of Chubb up more than 4%. I think they're hitting an all-time high in today's session, so quite a move here. Bloomberg Intelligence Property and Casualty Insurance Senior Analyst Matthew Palazzola joining us here in studio. All right, still to come, we are still waiting for healthcare's great DNA revolution for the DNA testing company 23andMe. That's a big problem.
2:21 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Those earlier gains for the U.S. stock market, they are gone, evaporated, disappeared. Right now we have got the S&P lower, down 2 points, 53.06. Dow Industrials negative just a couple of minutes ago. Right now holding on to a 6-point gain of less than 0.1%. This on a day when we saw the Dow advance through 40,000. Right now we have got the NASDAQ Composite Index down 16, a drop there of 0.1%. 10-year, 4.37% with a 2-year yielding 4.78%. Spot gold lower by 0.3%, 23.78 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.7 now, 79.17 a barrel. Bottom line, stocks are hovering close to a record. And again, that Dow Jones Industrial Average did top 40,000. Under Armour shares down 0.8%. Under Armour slumping after the sportswear maker gave a full-year outlook that did fall short of Wall Street expectations. Recapping, earlier gains have evaporated. S&P right now down 1 point, drop there of less than 0.1%. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
All right, Charlie, thank you so much. Carol Master, Tim Stenovic here on Bloomberg Business Week. Well, you may have done it or someone in your family. We're talking about DNA testing with a company like 23andMe or Ancestry.com. Interesting to find out more about, of course, where your family's ancestry composition is, right? We all talk about it. We find out, hey, did you know my family's done it? All right, well, the DNA testing industry was aiming for a bit more, to a world where the medical community added genetic testing to its standard operating procedures.
I don't know, Carol. Maybe you find out stuff you don't necessarily want to know about your family or relatives. That's part of the story.
Hey, I've got a half-sister.
It's all part of the story.
No, I don't. At least I don't know yet.
After years and millions of spit kits, the doctors still don't care when it comes to this type of testing, at least for companies that are mass market. Mass market genetic screenings remain well apart from the medical mainstream. And for one of the players in the industry, 23andMe, it's actually never made a profit. Carol, it's the cover story of the new issue of Bloomberg Business Week. It's on newsstands, it's online on the Bloomberg. And here with us is Bloomberg News healthcare reporter Kristen V. Brown joining us in the studio.
Great story. So glad you could be here. DNA tests for everyone, lots of genetic data, and bam, research gets a boost and moves faster, and we create a roadmap for living to age 100. That's in your story. That was the plan.
That was the plan, yes.
And yet?
It did not quite go according to plan, which I will say is often the case in science, right? We have a big finding, we're like, wow, we just have to do this like 1 or 2 things and then we'll solve all disease, which is almost literally what they thought would happen with the human genome. But then as we started untangling it, we realized, oh, this is just like way more complicated than we realized. And that turned out to be trouble for companies like 23andMe that wanted you to be able to just spit in a tube and learn, all of the diseases you might be at risk for. But it turns out there's not just one gene for heart disease. There are so many genes we don't even know what they all are. It's
right?
so complicated, and they all interact, and we don't know how they interact. So they're trying to, for some of these things, do what's called a polygenic risk score and say, based on all of these genes, you might have a risk. But it winds up being more like you're slightly more elevated risk, not an actual roadmap for what do you do to stay healthy and live to 100.
And in a small portion of the folks who do the test, it does come back with some sort of result that says, okay, you do have the characteristics of this sort of genetic, I don't even know the proper terminology.
Variant.
Genetic variant, thank you. But then treatment for that, as you note in your story, can be incredibly expensive.
Right. So monogenic diseases, there's a lot of them. That's genes, a single gene that causes a disease. There's a lot of them, but they're usually very, very rare. And because they're rare and the therapies are also very complicated, fancy high-tech things, they're expensive. Small population, small market. So we have gotten a few of these therapies so far, but definitely not the, therapies that we expected for very common diseases like Alzheimer's, like cancer. So we've gotten therapies that have a small market, and so therefore they're really, really pricey.
We talk about people spitting in a tube. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands in the control room or here, but you did.
I
spit
did it, yeah.
I did not do it.
I have spit in so many tubes in the course of my journalism career, but I did for this particular story too.
And it wasn't the typical 23andMe $20 thing, right?
This is a
was
very
the
high-tech
high-end
test.
one.
Yeah, so 23andMe's latest offering is it's doing sequencing, not genotyping, which is a fancier. They're literally decoding every little bit of all of the protein coding regions of your genome, which are the ones that we think cause disease. And in doing that, they really hope to get this really holistic, nuanced picture of the genome. For me, in the sequencing, they actually didn't find anything. And then in the genotyping, which is a sort of more low budget option, they found that I might be at risk for celiac disease, but I can tell you I had avocado toast this morning for breakfast.
Doing just
and
fine.
it went fine.
Okay.
It went fine. So, so for me at least, this is a almost $1,000 test, and I learned that I might have a disease that I don't have. So I don't know.
Well, did you do anything about that? Like, I'm curious, did it cause you to say, well, maybe I'll have a doctor look into this?
Well, usually if you have celiac disease, you have a violent reaction when you eat gluten. So I felt pretty confident. I also said I might one day develop glaucoma. I have a slightly increased risk, but you can't actually do anything about that. So it's I don't know what to do with that knowledge. So I felt like I should have spent that $1,000 on some shoes instead. Maybe, I don't know.
Preach it to the choir. Well, the medical community, right, has been, to some extent, they haven't embraced this idea.
No.
So, I mean, is that part of the problem? Is it just a case that it's complicated and maybe it is the right idea? Or, like, in your reporting, like, what's the kind of feedback on this?
So I started looking into, I wrote this story because I started wondering, for the decade I've covered this topic, people have told me, this is the year genetics is going to catch on. This is the year. This is finally the year. No, this year. And it just never happened. And so I started asking some of my longtime sources, is this happening? What's the status here, guys? And I was surprised to hear from many people who had been boosters for the genome, who were now saying, we're not sure it's ever going to happen.
That's amazing.
And with science, you never know. Maybe we'll turn a corner, we'll find something that will suddenly unlock everything. But based on what we know now, it does feel like it's just so complicated that for the average healthy person, there won't be value really in getting a genetic screen. Now, if you have a history of cancer in your family, if you want to become a parent and you want to make sure you don't have any genetic conditions lurking in your genome you could pass on, that stuff, all worth it. But if you're just an average healthy person trying to live their best life, it just really seems like there's not going to be value in these tests.
It raises the question about what the future is for 23andMe, and that's a big part of your cover story for Bloomberg Business Week, the idea that the stock has been under pressure over the last few years, down more than 94% over that period of time. Richard Branson lost over $100 million on it going public. What is the future for 23andMe as a business?
Yeah, so, they're in a real tough spot. They just got an extension to try and get their stock back up over $1. They have until, I believe, November to do that.
The concern is that they'll be delisted.
Yeah, the concern is that they will be delisted. And I think in a move to prevent that from happening, CEO Ann Wojcicki has filed an intent to take the company private herself, to buy it back, basically. So that could be one thing we see, but I think that it's a really rocky road ahead for them.
Well, it's interesting, and I don't know, is this a company that might benefit being private in terms of having the time, the luxury, maybe the money, to kind of figure this out?
Based on what the stock did when she filed that 8K, I would say that the market thinks it would benefit from going private. It's a hard company because it's part consumer, part drug development, and the investors in those two different kinds of companies, Anne has said this herself, they kind of have different expectations. So it's a weird blend of things, and that has created an additional challenge on top of having a consumer product that a lot of consumers maybe don't want anymore. So
what about the data and the data breaches that we've heard about, the security of this information? Years ago, I'm going to say, my mom was right. She was like, why would I want to give a company this type of information once it's out there? And I was actually defending, I was saying, no, this type of stuff stays safe. Fast forward a few years, there's a big data breach.
Yeah, I mean, Anne has said that she thinks that privacy concerns has been one of the reasons kit sales have slowed. She said that in the past. And, you know, that could definitely be what's going on. One analyst joked to me that 23andMe would probably do better to just give the kit away for free in exchange for getting people's data, because that is the most valuable asset
Especially
they
in
have.
How much we've talked about generative AI, and you think about the more data that comes into the pool, whether or not that can help kind of be a turning point, like more information.
I mean, they have 15 million genomes. That is one of the biggest genetic databases on par with Ancestry and the country of China. So that's really valuable. And so if they can keep growing that asset, that could be big.
And to be clear, there was a data breach of people's personal information.
Yes, there was a data breach that had personal, and it did contain some genetic information.
All right, Elizabeth, our producer, YouTube producer, and me, we're both with your mom about this in terms of the information. Any questions that you still have? You've reported this story out, and you're thinking about it. What questions are still kind of top of mind for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, having covered this field for a decade, it was sort of an existential crisis to actually do this story and be, questioning whether this thing that I have covered for a decade really doesn't matter. So I think that I just want to see how this science unfolds and what value we will wind up getting from the genome. Because I don't think that it's going to wind up having been for naught that we sequenced the human genome 20 years ago. But I think what we're going to get isn't what we expected. So that's still to be written.
It's fascinating. I remember kind of early on in my career, they'd map something and we'd do a story. And then when they finally completed it, it was just like, wow, now we have all the information, what we can do with it. But here we are.
Here we are.
Here we are. More to come. That means more stories from you, more cover stories. Bloomberg News healthcare reporter Kristen V. Brown on this week's Bloomberg Business Week cover story, which you can get online on the Bloomberg and catch it also on the newsstand.
So you haven't done one of the tests yet?
I haven't. One of my brothers had.
Yeah, my sister did it.
But
and I think, if she did it, then
it's out there.
Yeah, we know.
It's definitely out there.
People can connect the dots.
Kristen. Good to know.
All right, coming up, we've got the Wall Street CEO we all listen to big time, JP Morgan's Jamie Dimon on the rally in inflation. Where is he concerned? That's coming up next.
Well, before that, though, we're checking the latest world and national news. We got Amy Morris in the Bloomberg 99.1 News in Washington, D.C. Hey, Amy.
Hi, Tim. The Justice Department has formally moved to reclassify marijuana as a less dangerous drug. It's a historic shift in generations of U.S. drug policy. The proposed rule recognizes the medical uses of cannabis. It does not legalize marijuana outright for recreational use. President Biden has asserted executive privilege over recordings of his interview with special counsel Robert Hur. House Judiciary Committee Chair Jim Jordan says he does not trust the written transcripts.
The recordings are necessary. The transcripts alone are not sufficient evidence.
Jordan's committee and the Oversight Committee were preparing to bring contempt of Congress charges against Attorney General Merrick Garland for declining to comply with a subpoena for the interview tapes. Prosecutor star witness in the hush money case against Donald Trump back in the hot seat today as defense lawyers try to trip away at Michael Cohen's crucial testimony implicating the former president. The court's going to be off tomorrow so Donald Trump can attend his son's high school graduation ceremony in Florida. And New Jersey Senator Bama Mendez's wife has breast cancer. She'll have to go through a mastectomy. That's why she was granted a trial delay in the federal corruption trial against the couple. They're charged with accepting cash, gold bars, and a Mercedes in exchange for political favors. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Amy Morris, and this is Bloomberg.
2:40 on Wall Street. We do check markets all day long here at Bloomberg. Yes, the Dow is higher, not above 40,000, 39,938. S&P will call that unchanged on the day right now. NASDAQ also giving up earlier gains. Right now, the NASDAQ Composite Index in the red. NASDAQ down by 11, a drop there of just about 0.1%. Bottom line here, we do have the Dow hovering near records as the Dow earlier crossed that 40,000 mark on bets that rate cuts will keep powering corporate America. 10-year, 4.37%. The 2-year, 4.79%. Spot gold down 0.3%, 23.78 the ounce. And West Texas Intermediate crude up 0.8%, 79.29 for a barrel of WTI. GameStop and AMC Entertainment slumping for a second day as the meme stock frenzy that gripped markets early this week fades. GameStop trading lower now by 25%. AMC Entertainment lower now by 12%. Recapping, S&P little changed, up now by 1 point. I'm Charlie Pellet. That is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Thank you so much, Charlie Pellet there. Well, a lot going on this week overseas. We've been covering it a lot here at Bloomberg, some great interviews. We've already highlighted the Choose France event, some great interviews coming out of that. We had the CEOs of Bank of America, the CEO of Goldman Sachs, of course, the French president, Emmanuel Macron. So much going on. We also had the Qatar Economic Forum where our own Eric Schatzker caught up with Ken Griffin of Citadel. So if you missed any of them, I highly recommend you head to Bloomberg.com or check it out on the Bloomberg terminal. But there is another event.
I was going to say, that's not all. That is not all. It's the JP Morgan Global Markets Conference in Paris. And as to be expected, Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, was there answering a wide range of questions when he spoke earlier with Bloomberg's Francine Lacroix, including weighing in on this week's record when it comes to stocks, and also whether equities were getting ahead of themselves.
I wouldn't call it turbulence. We've had good, healthy markets for quite a while. They're kind of predicting a soft landing, and you see that in both stock prices, which are kind of high, credit spreads, which are kind of low, markets which are kind of wide open. That's all good. It doesn't tell you what the future is going to be. I mean, I could point a lot of times in history where that was true, and the next year wasn't true, and so. We'll see. I don't pay as much attention to monthly numbers as most people do.
I know. So what do you think the future is for inflation and interest rates?
I'm a little more worried about it. I mean, we've had very big fiscal deficits, and, I think the underlying inflation may not go away the way people expect it to. And I look at the future, like a lot of things we look at are kind of inflationary. The green economy, the remilitarization of the world, the infrastructure requirements, the restructuring of trade, fiscal deficits. So I think there are a lot of inflationary forces in front of us that, may keep it a little bit higher than people expect. So the surprise would be rates are higher, inflation a little bit higher, and maybe that'll slow growth. And obviously geopolitics is a whole different issue. That could be determinative in what our economy does next year. And we're just not going to know.
But so does that mean you think it's 50-50 whether the Fed cuts or hikes next time around, the next move?
I really don't pay that much attention to that. The Fed will have to follow the data. And I don't know what the data is going to say, but I think, they are doing the right thing to be patient right now. See what's going to happen. They may not know for a couple of months.
But no big correction. I mean, if you don't pay, that much attention to it, it means you're not worried about anything.
No, I'm worried. I just said stocks are very high. And I think the chance of inflation staying high or rates going up are higher than other people think. So I think the chance, my view is whatever the world is pricing it for a soft landing, I think it's probably half that. I think the chance of something going wrong is higher than people think.
In the U.S. or globally?
Well, I'd say in the U.S., but also that could affect globally, yeah.
And so what does that mean for markets?
They'd be down. And credit spreads would gap out.
So why is the market not pricing that in?
A lot of happy talk.
Where does that happy talk come from?
Low rates, central banks are going to reduce rates. Maybe the geopolitical things disseminate, don't cause problems. And so, the future isn't predictable like that. So, I'm a student of history. I've watched all the inflection points. If you go back, my dad was a stockbroker. I go back to the booming markets of 72 and the collapse of 74. The healthy markets of 80, the collapse of 82. The 87 market crash, the 1990 real estate crash, and almost all of them were not predicted the year before. So I look at these factors that drive these things. They're not always known. As a company, we prepare for all of this. We can serve all our clients regardless.
But what do you see as the main stress right now? Because if it's geopolitics, we talk about it. It's just not really priced in. Is it distress? Is it something actually going under that you worry about, or just multiple factors coming in at the same time?
I think geopolitics could create the main stress that we're worried about in terms of oil and gas prices, trade alliances. But I think the surprise would be higher rates because inflation didn't go down. That inflation's been stubborn, maybe bounces up next year. I think inflation next year may be in the cards. It may have nothing to do with what you're seeing today. So that to me is the surprise. If you had higher rates and God forbid stagflation, yeah, you'll see stress in real estate and leveraged companies and some private credit and things like that.
All right, feels like some sobering comments. That, of course, is JP Morgan Chase Chairman and CEO Jamie Dimon talking with Bloomberg's Francine Lacroix at the JP Morgan Global Markets Conference in Paris. Right, it felt a little bit more subdued.
Yeah, he mentioned previous crashes and reminded everybody that, hey, we didn't see these things coming. They were not predicted the year before by any means. And also, I think the idea, and this is something that we talked a little bit about yesterday, actually, with Beyond the Bell, the idea of stocks being higher and that indicating some sort of looseness when it comes to financial conditions, which is really not what the Fed wants to see.
Right, exactly. And what's interesting, too, is I feel like everybody keeps reminding us there's a lot of liquidity still sloshing around in the market, right? We've had a lot of money financially from the government, certainly coming post-pandemic, a lot of stimulus, and then even post-pandemic in terms of, you think of some of the bills that have come out of Congress through President Biden and some of his spending programs, whether it's on infrastructure, whether it's on semiconductor, renewables, if you will. That's more money coming into the economy, and that's chasing, and it can certainly create some inflationary activity.
He made these comments earlier in the day, a day that where we see the S&P 500, the NASDAQ Composite, NASDAQ 100, and the Dow all all reaching highs. He said stocks are very high. I think the chance of inflation staying high or rates going up are higher than people think. My view is whatever the world is pricing in for a soft landing, I think it's probably half of that. I think the chances of something going wrong are higher than people think.
Yeah, listen, just think about the last couple of years. Go back 2 years, we had the Russia-Ukraine war. Weren't anticipating that. I mean, obviously, probably if you were in the intelligence community, you had some ideas of what was coming, but nonetheless, certainly I think for investors, that caught us off guard. Over a year ago, concerns in the regional banking industry, the Middle East war, which continues to today. These are things that I don't think people necessarily had on their, worry list, if you will, and here we are.
COVID-19 happening, in the early parts of 2020, a little more than 4 years ago. That was a shock that many people did not see coming.
Hey, one of the things I do want to highlight, too, that he talked about, he mentioned that geopolitics could create the main stress that we're worried about amid the impact that those dynamics have on oil and gas prices, trade and alliances. When it comes to China, he said the right thing for America is to, quote, fully and deeply engage. Still, that fragile relationship between the two countries makes banking in the country, where Dimon said JP Morgan has roughly 1,500 multinational clients, a riskier prospect. He said they're not leaving China. He said we're going to serve our clients there. We're just much more cognizant the risk is higher. He said you look at China from a risk-reward basis, it used to be very good. It's not so great anymore.
We should also note that his comments come at a time when JP Morgan has been boosting headcount. They've been boosting compensation. Many banks have been cutting back at this point. We're seeing sixth year of record revenue for the firm. Recent months, though, showing some signs of pressure. Net interest income ended a streak of 7 record quarters. Dimon did blame deposit margin compression and lower deposit balances in the consumer business for that sequential decline.
It's a much more balanced perspective, and it's like one of the things that we all felt like coming off of Milken, that there was a lot of enthusiasm, although I felt like underneath it there was a baseline of cautiousness or concern of whether it's geopolitics, things coming at us from not, from a place that we're kind of don't have on our radar. And I feel like this is what Jamie's saying. Remember we talked about that he's setting up, for a rate environment from, 2 to 8%?
Yeah,
quite a
they're
swing.
planning for, the contingency plan. I love
and you probably have to do that as a bank. You have to have plans
Right.
for whatever the environment is.
A lot of happy talk
A
is
lot
what
of
he
happy
said,
talk.
is the reason why markets seem to shrug off his concerns.
Irrational exuberance?
Happy talk, Carol.
Happy talk.
Happy talk.
Well, it's interesting. On a day when we continue to look at the markets, went above 40,000 on the Dow Jones Industrial Average, S&P 500, 5310. So we've gone above 5,300. We know we're looking at maybe another, 24th record on the S&P this year. And the momentum continues. And we've got the NASDAQ just up a little bit. Nonetheless, very interesting. All right, if you missed any of that conversation, head to Bloomberg.com or check it out on the Bloomberg. This is Radio.